A very good morning, everybody. Today is our third day of the presentation season. Semester 3 students are making their presentations on various topics. Today, we are going to have presentations on post-colonial studies. Let us have a look at the topics on which the students in this morning session are going to make their presentations. Let me share the screen to read out the topics. Okay, so we will start with, let me share the screen. Yeah. Okay, we'll start with the first presentation by SANKET, and his topic is a critical exploration of post-colonial literature, major texts, theories, key figures, and contemporary perspectives. Okay. Followed by Jyoti's presentation on hybridity and cultural conflict, a post-colonial reading. BHUMI's presentation on colonial legacies in the 21st century, the contemporary relevance of Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. In Jyoti's presentation topic, you see that the colon is not put properly. On the first day, we told you that there should be no space before the punctuation marks. After Bhumi, Divya's presentation on the double age of violence, Fanon's radical vision in The Wretched of the Earth. The Wretched of the Earth is the text, so it should be in single inverted comma. There is an unnecessary double inverted comma after Earth. KHUSHI GOSWAMI's presentation on African nationalism in David Coute's at fever pitch, and Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. PARATHIV's on feminist rewriting of Jane Eyre. The Madwoman speaks in Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea. DHRUVIKA's on postcolonial feminism in Wide Sargasso Sea. RUTVI's on voices. Are you putting hashtag there? Hashtag on voices. And narrative power in faux. So faux is a text. If it is a text, then you have to put it in single red comma. Jai on intertextuality as resistance, writing back to the empire in J.M. Coetzee's faux. KHUSHI Makwana's on the role of silence, absence, and the unspoken in faux. Kumkum on whisper of the marginalized, narrative authority, and the politics of silence in faux. Krupali on the silence of Friday and the silencing of refugees. A post-colonial reading of Coetzee's faux in the age of migration. Krishna Vara's presentation on a historical study of cannibalism with reference to J.M. Coetzee's faux. KHUSHI Ravia's presentation on post-colonial theories in Bollywood films. Trupti on beyond colonial legacies, literature, climate crisis, and narratives of survival in the works of Ghosh, Roy, and Adiga. Last one will be by Bhargav on globalization and the cultural marketplace, homogenization or hybridization. Okay, so let us start with the first presentation.
Good morning, everyone. On the third day of presentation, I'm making presentation on a critical exploration of post-colonial literature, major texts, theories, key figures, and contemporary perspective. This is my academic and presentation information. Table of contents. Uh, Let me introduce the what is post-colonial literature. Post-colonial uh, is the impact of colonization on a cultural identity and social societies, especially after countries gain independence. And it explores the how imperialism shaped literature, history, culture, production from colonial uh, period to the present. And the post-colonial literature focus such areas such as race, ethnicity, culture, power relation, and identity formerly colonized society. And post-colonial literature also challenge the Western dominance and represent the voice of colonized people. uh, Research question and hypothesis. My research question is how does post-colonial literature deconstruct the cultural hegemony established by colonial powers through its representation of native identities and histories? And hypothesis is a post-colonial literature continue to evolve as a discourse of resistance, offering critical insight into global inequality, uh, transnational identity, and the ongoing neo-colonial structure shaping contemporary societies. Uh, Let me introduce the historical background of post-colonial literature. When we see the historical background, so we notice that post-colonial literature it was emerged in the response to the extensive period of European colonialism, which began in the 15th century and continued through the mid 20th century. And another thing is we found out that European colonial expansion and spread on countries such as Africa, Asia, Caribbean, etc. And this later struggle for the independence. And the European colonial power established administrative, educational, linguistic, and terrestrial system that shape post-colonial identity. And one another thing is a political culture economic system imposed, for example language, educational law, and other lasting effect we can see in the historical background of post-colonial literature. And after independence, we noticed that such issues of nation building, border demarcation, and internal division. So these are the background of post-colonial literature. Theoretical foundation. So when we see the post-colonial literature, we found that some important theories of post-colonial literature, such as colonialism and post-colonialism. So let me introduce what is colonialism. It is refers to the system that conquest, governance, exploitation, and vast region by Western powers under the modern imperial expansion. And post-colonialism examines that it is a lasting effect of colonial rule and how formally colonized society reshaped their identity and after independence. And another key terms we have to notice in the post-colonial literature, cultural hegemony, hybridity, subaltern, and otherness. Character of here is some characteristic of post-colonial literature. Uh, so we can find out. So here we find out that post-colonial literature explores the impact of colonialism on culture, identity, power structure within the formerly colonized society, and it explores the colonialism affect the cultural identity and power, and it expressed the resistance and the reclaim by giving voice to silence history and challenging the imperial ideology. And post-colonial literature also reflect the cultural hybridity and the blending of the indigenous and colonial influence in the language and identity. And another thing is we it uses the colonizer's language as a tool of subversion, reshaping the express local experience as a characteristic of post-colonial literature. Here are some major texts in post-colonial literature. We find out that uh, Chinua Achebe's Things Falls Apart. It is a novel showing that the Igbo's life before the during colonial rule, exposing how British Empire disturbed the indigenous tradition and identities while reclaiming an African voice. And another example is White Sargasso Sea. It's by Jane Rhys. We find out that post-colonial and feminist perspective portraying the psychological and social fragmentation caused by colonial history and radical hierarchies in the Caribbean. Another is a Foe by James Coetzee, and that reimagine Robinson Crusoe from new perspective, especially through the character Susan Barton, and who tries to tell Friday's story in a inte- interrogates issues of voice representation, marginalized authorship, and who gets to the history how colonized narratives silence certain characters and how truth is mediated by power. And one another very famous literature is Midnight Children by Salman Rushdie, and it is showing that it uses magical realism, historical allegories, and personal narrative to trace India's transmission from British colonial rule through partition and independence. And another is Decolonizing the Mind by Ngugi Thiago. It is the collection of essay in which Ngugi argues that language is central to culture identity and politics of colonization. He advocates that African writers should shift from writing in a colonial language to indigenous language to reclaim cultural identity, integrity, resist mental colonization, and empower people. So these are a major text of the post-colonial literature. Significance of post-colonial study. So why post-colonial literature is a significant? So post-colonial study remains significant because it connects the literature with politics, history, and culture, and it helps to understand the continuing influence of colonialism, globalization, media, and education. And it also help us to also reflect the contemporary issues such as global south, anthropocene, biopolitics, etc. And the post-colonial literature also introduced the interdisciplinary approach that linking with environmental studies, gender studies, cultural theory, etc. Some important key figures. Edward Said. Edward Said was a Palestinian American literary critic, theorist, and public intellectual, and he was best known for his book Orientalism, which founded the field of post-colonial studies. And his legacy is a revolutionized literary and cultural studies by linking culture, politics, and imperialism, making him a foundational figure of post-colonial studies. And another is Homi K. Bhabha. He is a literary theorist and critic, and he was best known for his work, Location of Culture, and he gave the concept of a hybridity, mimicry, and third space. Another is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, and he was famous for his giving the term subaltern. And another is Frantz Fanon. He was a uh, Marxian psychiatrist, philosopher, and revolutionary thinker, and he was famous for his post-colonial literature works such as Black Skin, White Mask, The Wretched of the Earth. Importance of post-colonial literature in modern times. So we find out that it is a post-colonial literature is an ongoing colonial legacy that reveals the colonial power that reshaped the globally inequality, culture, and politics. And also we can see the cultural identity, hybridity. Also we can see in the post-colonial studies, and it the literature also empowers silence community to express the resistance and reclaim their identity. And it also highlights the social issues such as identity crisis, racism, cultural assimilation, etc. Here I put some contemporary examples that are showing the post-colonial literature. Here are some movie examples of post-colonial literature. Conclusion. Uh, so post-colonial literature is not only literature but also connect with politics, history, and contemporary issues. And some important key figures like Homi K. Bhabha, Spivak, Edward Said, also they are right on that. And his legacy of colonialism continue to shape globally narrative and making post-colonial essential for understanding our interconnected world. These are references. And thank you from this is from my side. Now you have any question, you can ask.
Sanket, in what ways does post-colonial literature addresses ongoing forms of neo-colonialism in the modern world?
So post-colonial in a neo-colonialism, and so post-colonial literature showing that it is the power exists in today's new way, like known as a neo-colonialism. It reveals the how powerful countries continues to control weaker nations, such not only direct rule but control as a economic politics and politics way. And it addressing issues such as post-colonial writers encourage reader to recognize the question modern inequalities and effects of colonization in a neo-colonialism.
So, Sanket, my question is, how does post-colonial literature function as a form of resistance against the cultural hegemony?
Okay, so post-colonial literature resist the cultural hegemony because it is reclaimed the voice of silence literature during the colonial time, and it also using the colonial's language to subverging way to transform the literature in a new way. Okay.
See, in your hypothesis, you mentioned, and you have to try to prove that hypothesis throughout your presentation, your research question or hypothesis. So, how does post-colonial literature deconstruct the cultural hegemony established by colonial powers through its representation of native identities and histories? So, even in the last slide, you should be concluding this. You have to answer this question that you have raised. By in between, you give illustrations that how in this text it is happening, how in the another text that is happening, and then you bring down the conclusion. That so that flow is not seen in the presentation. It gave the question, it gave some other points, and then it concluded in a much different manner than trying to answer the research question.
So hello everyone, myself JYOTI MER. Today I am dealing with my presentation topic is Hybridity and Cultural Conflict, a Post-Colonial Reading. This is my personal information, table of contents, and a research question is what form of the cultural conflict emerged from the encounter between colonial and indigenous traditions, and second, what are the social and psychological effect of cultural conflict on post-colonial subjects. Hypothesis: cultural conflict arises from the tension between colonial impositions and indigenous traditions, often leading to alienation, mimicry, and negotiation of identities. Psychological and social tensions resulting from cultural conflict are reflected in post-colonial narratives of double consciousness and alienation. Key concepts: post-colonialism, academic field that analyze the aftermath of colonialism, examines how colonial power shaped identity, language, literature, and culture. Concerns: power colonizers versus colonized relationships, identity, how colonization fractures selfhood, resistance strategies by colonized people, writing, black reclaiming cultures, representations, who controls how cultures are portrayed, and hybridity, central idea in post-colonial theory. Definition: the merging of mixing of cultural practice, traditions, and language. The third space, a site of negotiation between colonizers and colonized, neither purely one culture nor the other. A newly hybrid identity challenges colonial authority by destabilizing rigid cultural binaries, and cultural conflicts arises when different value system in meet colonized versus indigenous, often seen it language use, English versus native tongue, religious, Christianity versus tradition belief systems, and social structures, Western individualism versus community based system, and leads to alienation, double consciousness, mimicry, harmony and negotiation of the belonging in both colonial and post-colonial contexts. Hybridity explain form of hybridity, linguistic mixing English with local idioms. Example, Rushdie. Cultural blends of Western customs with nations' traditions, identity, split between colonial culture and native heritage. Example, HB and Sully. Uh, Effects, creativity, new art and literature, confusion, identity crisis and loss of roots, resistance, challenges colonial dominance and cultural conflict, loss of native language and traditions. Colonizers often suppress local language, rituals, and customs, lead to culture erosion and the weakening of collective memory. Eternal conflict. Assimilation versus resistance. Colonized subjects struggle between adopting colonial values of survival and preserving native identity, creates psychological tension and divided loyalties and mimicry. Colonized people imitate colonizers' dress, speech, or manners, almost the same but not quite, never fully accepted. Literary depictions. W.B. Du Bois double consciousness fractures self-perception. Post-colonial texts show alienation, exile, and identity crisis. Example, the HB Things Fall Apart, Lahiri's diaspora stories. And the theoretical perspectives in Frantz Fanon argues that colonization deeply damaged the psychology and the cultural of the colonized, creating feelings of interiority and alienation. And Edward said in Orientalism, explained how the West constructed the East as the other to justify domination, reinforcing stereotypes and unequal power relations. And Bhumi K. Bhabha introduced the idea of hybridity and the third space, where new subversive and identities emerge beyond rigid colonial and binaries. And examples in literature, Chino Achebe and Things Fall Apart shows the clash between Igbo traditions and British colonial authority, highlighting the destruction of native cultures. And Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children explores hybrid identities and post-colonial India, where characters embody both colonial and indigenous influences. And Jhumpa Lahiri's interpreter of maladies and captures the cultural conflict and identity struggles in a diasporic life, balancing Indian heritage with Western lifestyle. And Nagugiwa Thiango in the advocates writing in the native language and resistance to cultural domination, reclaiming voice and identity. And positive and negative sides of hybridity. Positive aspects encourages cultural conflict, cultural creativity and innovation, and leads to the emergence of new literary, artistic, and linguistic forms, opens possibilities for dialogue between cultures. And negative aspects creates identity crisis and feelings of alienation, may lead to the erosion or delusion of cultural traditions, often reflects unequal power relations where the colonizer's cultural dominates. In conclusion, hybridity and cultural conflict are key to post-colonial studies, showing how colonization reshaped identities and cultures. Literature reflects both the struggles of cultural loss and the creative possibilities of blending traditions. The third space by Bhumi K. Bhabha highlights a site of resistance and negotiation, where new hybrid identities emerge. Hybridity, therefore, represents both challenge and opportunity in defining post-colonial societies. This is my references, and thank you. Now you are free and ask me a question.
So my question is, how do post-colonial authors depict the psychological struggle of individuals caught between two cultures?
In the post-colonial authors depicted a psychology struggle in individuals caught between two struggles, the theme of alienation and double consciousness and identity crisis. And next.
Who is next? Yeah, but why it is not coming up? Hmm? Is it posted properly? No, in the YouTube also it is not there. It is not shared properly. Okay, reply in comment. That in
Okay.
the comment you give the reply.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you from This Is My Site. So, very good morning, everyone. Today I'm here with the presentation on colonial legacy in the 21st century, the contemporary relevance of Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. These are the academic information, table of content, and now discuss very quickly and briefly about the Frantz Fanon, born in 1925 and died in 1961, born in Martinique, a French colony in the Caribbean, and he's trained as a psychiatrist, later become a revolutionary thinker and political activist. He worked in Algeria during the War of Independence. His medical and political experience shaped his understanding of colonial trauma and liberation. About the Wretched of the Earth, written during Algeria's anti-colonial struggle, published shortly before Fanon's death, examines colonialism as a system of domination that affects both the oppressor and the oppressed. Explored the psychological, social, cultural, and political dimension of colonization and decolonization, and advocate for revolutionary action and the creation of a new humanism beyond colonial oppression. Here is the colonialism and violence today. So, as per the Fanon's view on violence, we can see that argue that colonialism is rooted in violence. It imposes control through force, fear, and psychological domination. Believe that decolonization is inherently violent, as it involves dismantling oppressive system and reclaiming humanity. And also, so violence is not only a physical act, but also a psychological necessity for the colonized to regain agency and identity. Here is the contemporary lens that today's world still reflect colonial pattern of domination and control, and systematic violence is visible in state action, police brutality, and economic exploitation. And militarized policing and racial profiling mirror colonial method of surveillance and control. So cultural violence continues through media, stereotypes, education system, and political marginalization. Here is the example with both the global example and from the Indian context also. So the Black Lives Matter movement exposed structural racism rooted in colonial ideologies of white supremacy. So this Black Lives Matter This happened in the year of 2013 and in the UK. And here is the Palestinian resistance highlights ongoing neo-colonial aggression, territorial control, and cultural erasures. Here is the Indian context that state violence in regions like Kashmir and the Northeast mirrors colonial policing strategies and suppression of dissent. And here is a tribal and indigenous struggle. Adivasi movement against displacement and mining projects reveal neo-colonial exploitation and land and resources. And third is a farmer protest. In the year is 2020 to 2021. Showcased resistance against neoliberal politics that echo global economic domination, a continuation of colonial style exploitation. Then racism and oppression. So as per the Fanon's perspective, racism is a colonial construct. Fanon argues that racism was a tool of domination used to justify exploitation and maintain colonial hierarchies. And psychological oppression is colonized subjects internalized feeling of inferiority, leading to identity conflict and cultural alienation. And social hierarchy is social colonial powers divided societies through racial and cultural ranking, reinforcing inequality and control. Here is the contemporary relevance, like systematic racism continues to shape global power relation and institutional structures, and xenophobia and exclusion persist through immigration policies, the labor discrimination, and representation gaps. The Black Lives Matter movements expose systematic violence and racial bias rooted in colonial ideologies. And here is the Indian context examples, like caste and colorism. So while India's caste system predates colonialism, British rule reinforced and racialized caste divisions, linking whiteness with superiority and darkness with inferiority. So representation gaps, Dalit, Adivasis, and minority communities remain underrepresented in the elite institutions, and echoing Fanon's critique of systematic exclusion. So here is the chart that Shudra and untouchables consider as the inferiority. So darkness for the inferiority, and this Brahmin and Kshatriya and Vaishya is considered as superiority. So whiteness for the superiority. Then mental health and post-colonial trauma. So as per the Fanon's perspective, colonization and the psyche, Fanon as psychiatrists argue that colonial domination dehumanizes the colonized, producing feeling of inferiority and self-alienation. Mental health under oppression, the colonized internalize the colonizers gaze seeing themselves as a inferior, which leads to anxiety, self-hatred, and identity crisis. And here is the contemporary view that the post-colonial communities continue to experience intergeneration trauma, passed down through stories of displacement, slavery, and marginalization. And migrant and disparate population often face cultural dislocation, identity loss, and depression, reflecting Fanon's psychological insights. So here is the example of Indian context, that caste and mental health. Marginalized communities like a Dalit, Adivasi, so experience psychological traumas due to historical and systematic oppression comparable to colonial mental wounds. And studies show higher levels of stress, depression, and anxiety among caste oppressed group. Here is the partition trauma, 1947. The partition caused mass displacement, violence, and loss, leaving deep psychological scars across generations. Contemporary literature and therapy studies in India recognize intergenerational trauma as a colonial and nationalist legacy. And is Kashmir and Northeast India communities under prolonged militarization exhibit the signs of collective traumas, PTSD, and fear, echoing Fanon's description of life under colonial rule. And here is the social class and neo-colonialism. So as per the Fanon's perspective, economics roots of colonialism, Fanon argues that colonialism is not just political domination, but an economic system designed to extract wealth from the colonized and persist of inequality after political independence. Economic dependence often continues, creating neo-colonial structure controlled by global capitalism. And the lumpen proletariat, Fanon emphasized the revolutionary potential of the most oppressed and marginalized peasant, works, and the unemployed as a true agent of social change. And here is the contemporary relevance, like a neocolonialism through globalization. Former colonial powers maintain dominance through trade, debt, and multinational corporations. Here is the example, like a rural and tribal exploitation. So how Adivasi and Dalit communities remain economically marginalized, and then education crisis and global markets, like as we see earlier, farmer protest 2020 to 21 highlights resistance of neo-liberal agriculture reforms that favor global corporations over small farmers. And now I conclude my presentation here. So Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth continues to hold powerful relevance in the 21st century, offering a framework to understand how colonial legacies still shapes modern society. His insights into violence, racism, and class exploitation and psychological trauma reveal that decolonization is not merely a political event, but an ongoing process of reclaiming identity, dignity, and equality. In contemporary India and across the global south, issue like economic disparity, caste oppression, and colorism and cultural alienation mirror the structure Fanon's critique. Thus, true liberation today demands confronting not only political and economic domination, but also the deeper psychological and cultural wounds of colonialism. These are the references. And thank you so much. Now you can ask the question. Social media.
My question is, how can Fanon's idea help us to understand social media activism today?
As per Fanon, tell that silence is the oppression. So through the social media, ordinary people also raise their voice for their for their rights and for the injustice and all. So they can also uh, uh, raise their voice against the authority through the post, through the videos, and various online platforms. Social so through the social media, ordinary people or marginalized people also raise their voice, and through the social media use of through social media, they can also uh, raise their voice against the authority.
So, Bhumi, my question is that what does Fanon's call for new humanism still matters?
Fanon says new humanism, like Fanon's ideas that we have to build a new world. There is no any discrimination, but all are treated equally, and there is no any class discriminations, culture, and not anyone judged by their race and culture and social class. So if uh, humanity learn learn all the people equally. So yes, that is how the finance call that new humanism is still matter. This is from my side. Thank you so much. So, hello everyone. I'm DIVYA PALEDHARA, and today is on the post-colonial studies paper. My presentation topic is the double edge of violence, Fanon's radical vision in the Wretched of the Earth. So, let's begin. So, here is my academic informations, table of content, which we will discuss in detail. And here, my research question is, how does Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth conceptualize violence as both a psychological necessity and a political instrument of decolonization? And to what extent does this dual vision challenge or reinforce the moral boundaries of liberation movements? And my hypothesis is Fanon's representation of violence in The Wretched of the Earth functions as a therapeutic mechanism for the colonized psyche and a strategic force of revolutionary transformation. Yet, its radical framing risk romanticizing violence, thereby revealing the paradox at the heart of decolonial ethics, the tension between liberation and humanism. So this is introduction about Frantz Fanon and his novel, his work, The Wretched of the Earth. It's already about on the Wretched of the Earth, like a controversial manifesto, anti-colonial thoughts. As Bhumi mentioned in her presentation earlier. So I skip this. Historical context: colonial Algeria and the roots of violence. Colonial Algeria, 1830 to 1962. Algeria was under French colonial rule for over 130 years, characterized by systematic political, economic, and cultural oppression, land disposition, and economic exploitation. Indigenous Algerians were often removed from fertile lands which were given to European settlers, creating structural inequalities. Cultural erasures like French language, education, and also religion were imposed to suppress the local identity and heritage. The FLN and the War of Independence, 1954 to 1962. National Liberation Front, FLN, formed in 1954 to unify Algerian nationalist movement. Guerrilla tactic, urban and rural campaign, and mobilization of civilians challenged the French authority. And violence became a tool of resistance, reflecting both the necessity of breaking colonial control and asserting national identity. And here, French colonial response: the French military employed counterinsurgency measures, including torture, mass assets, forced relocations, and psychological warfare. The Battle of Algiers, 1956 to 7, highlighted brutal suppression methods, drawing international attention and also condemnation. Then connection to Fanon's argument: Fanon, working as a psychiatrist, as we all know, in Algeria, witnessed first hand the psychological and social trauma of colonial violence. He argued that such pervasive violence made armed resistance both politically necessary and also psychological liberating for the colonized. Here, violence is a therapeutic. Fanon's call colonialism as a structural violence. Fanon asserts that colonialism itself is an institutionalized system of violence, political domination, economic exploitation, and psychological degradation. The colonized live in what Fanon terms Manichaean world, divide between the powerful and the powerless, where the colonizers' existence depend on the negation of the native. Hence, counter-violence is not born out of moral corruption, but as a necessary reaction, the only means to dismantle colonial hierarchy and reclaim humanity. So here the quote is, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. I borrowed from the original text of Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. Continue here. Violence is the psychological liberation, like colonialism as a spiritual violence. Violence is a therapeutic violence. Violence also psychological liberation in many peoples. And how Fanon decolonize of their people. So here the violence is a collectivizing force, and violence is the political necessity. Rejection of peaceful negotiation. Fanon dismisses peaceful negotiation under colonial rules as empty and unequal, arguing that the colonizer only understands the language of force, since colonialism operates through power, not a morality. But liberation cannot arise from a dialogue or a diplomacy, armed struggle, and political recognition. Violence becomes the political language of decolonization, as we know, transforming the colonized from passive victims to active agents of history. The FLN, Front Liberation Nation, in Algeria demonstrated this shift through guerrilla struggle. It forced both France and international bodies to acknowledge Algeria's political legitimacy. And from revolt to sovereignty, for Fanon, violence is not mere destruction but a creative force that reconstruct identity and nationhood. Yet he warns of post-independence dangers. The national bourgeoisie may reproduce the colonial hierarchy unless revolutionary consciousness endures. And here, the danger of oversimplification, here as the critic, reducing decolonization to violence. Oversimplifying decolonization as violent ignores its complexity. Fanon argued that violence can reclaim agency, but not all struggles are violent. Then a cycle of post-independence authoritarianism, emphasizing violence may legitimize the authoritarian rule of post-independence. Like Gandhi warned that violence breeds trauma and militarism. And then neglect of non-violent alternative, ignoring models like Gandhian civil disobedience reduces decolonization to conflict. Non-violent resistance offers ethical, effective alternatives. So here, key takeaways and critical reflection. Like decolonization is a complex, not only violent, reducing it to bloodshed oversimplifies history. Then violence is a tool to may lead to a cycle of authoritarianism and societal trauma of post-independence. Non-violent alternative like such as the Gandhian civil disobedience shows that liberation can be ethical and effective. Fanon's insight remains relevant today. Here, liberation requires both structural changes and attention to human agency. And a critical reminder, understanding decolonization demands acknowledging multiple strategies and their long-term consequences. And in conclusion, Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth reveals the double-edged nature of violence. It can be a powerful tool for liberation, enabling the oppressed to reclaim agency and dignity. Yet it also carries the risk of perpetuating trauma, authoritarianism, and instability. His radical vision urges a critical understanding of decolonization not as a simple call to arms, but as a complex process where the pursuit of justice must balance revolutionary action with the long-term goal of building inclusive democratic society. So my learning outcome is understanding the dual nature of violence, recognize how violence in decolonization can function as both a liberating and destructive force within the post-colonial context. And second one is analyze Fanon's radical vision, like critically examine Fanon's argument that revolutionary violence restores agency and identity to the oppressed while questioning its ethical and psychological implication. And third one is evaluate post-colonial and ethical dimension, as is how the use of violence in liberation movement shapes post-independence governance, trauma, and the balance between non-violent alternative and revolutionary actions. So this is my references, and thank you. If you have any questions, then ask.
My question is that why does Fanon consider violence necessary in the process of decolonization, and can it really help restore the dignity of the colonized?
So Fanon's idea of violence is necessary because colonized people struggle and suffer in that era. So decolonization Fanon says decolonization is mostly effect on a phenomenon like what people are struggling and suffering. So it's maybe dignity of colonites.
So, Divya, my question is, what are the risks of relying too heavily on Fanon's idea of violence, and how should we think about its use today?
Yes, Fanon's idea of violence is powerful, but oversimplifying it can be also dangerous. Like Gandhian idea of post independence violence is violence is not like that, but Fanon argues that and critique on that, and then Fanon's idea of violence is think about today's all over oppressions and struggle and all those things. So this is from my side, and thank you.
Hello everyone, myself KHUSHI GOSWAMI. Today's my presentation topic is African nationalism in David Caute's at a fever pitch and Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. It is based on Matthew Whitshell's article, These Dog Will Do As We Say. So basically this article is about the comparative British novel and anti-colonial theoretical text to show how independence did not solve always the problems which left by colonialism. These are my academic detail and presentation details. These are points which I am going to discuss in these presentations. My research question is, how does Matthew Whitshell's comparative reading of David Caute's At Fever Pitch and Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth explain the dangers of nationalism in post-colonial Africa, and what theoretical frameworks support his argument? My hypothesis is Whitshell's article suggests that both Caute's novel and Fanon's theory diagnose the same structural danger of independence, that colonial hierarchies may survive through a national elites, and by combining literary criticism with post-colonial and Marxist theory, which shall argue that fiction and political thought together offer a fuller understanding of decolonization and than either text alone. These are the brief introduction of novel At Fever Pitch. At fever pitch means something that is from extreme level. So in this novel, this is set in African country at the moment of decolonization, and the main characters we shall focus in this in that article. Suli Azambugu is a young man from the northern, and Michel Glenn, a British junior officer who feels lost in his role and his private life. And then was Kofi Bandia, a southern leader who rises to power. So basically in this novel shows there's a binary between northern and southern. So the story shows how the southern is more modernized because the colonizer built schools, cinemas, and shops there, and the northern stay poor and rural, which creates inequality. So this division becomes important because after independence, the southern elites being to dominate the northern, and this coping the old colonial pattern. These are the brief introduction of the Wretched of the Earth. As we all know, here in this article, Matthew Whitshell focus on the chapter The Pitfall of National Consciousness from this novel. So here Fanon explains that when colonizers leave, The new rulers are often a small nation, often a small nation bourgeoisie. So here in this novel, national bourgeoisie act like being as colonizers, like they indirect way support the former colonies, and keeping inequality alive still in their nation. So here Fanon warns about regionalism and tribalism. So people may start to fight along local or ethical lines instead of building one united nation. So what Vishal's main argument is, Courts and Fanon look different, but they identify the same historical risk, like a new elite copying colonial power. So it means, as I mentioned, the national bourgeoisie do in the Wretched of the earth. So it's a motif of motif is align modernity. It means builds without function. It captures the weakness of independence if it only copying Western models. Method, Matthew Vishal's method. So he places Caute is a British novelist, and Fanon, who is a political thinker, or as a anti-colonial theory text. So they put side by side. So this comparison shows this diagnostic same structural problem, but point to different responses. So here Vishal argues that reading a British novel alongside Fanon's theory reveals a shared diagnosis, like a colonial structure often survive independence. So then theoretical framework which are using in this article to support the argument of Matthew Vishals. So first he uses Edward Said's culture and imperialism, in which according to that theory, Vishal places Coute's novel in tradition of end of the empire of literature. And then Homi Bhabha's theory shows how Fanon is often read through post-structuralism, and we shall reclaim his decolonization context. And then Neil Lazarus is emphasize Fanon's role in socialism and anti-colonialism thoughts, and other theories like a Marxist framework we shall use here, like used through Fanon focus on class struggle, economic inequality, and in the uneven development of between rich and poor class. Then here Coute's key scene and images which are used in this article. So early in the novel, Zuli Azambugu is installed in a bar by Southern Africans, and they says, soon we shall be free, and this dog will do as we say. So they will dig server for us. So it is used for the poor people, and this line shows the powerful because it shows how oppressed are ready to oppose others once they get. So at the end of the novel, Caute describes a coin with the face of Banadea, that nationalist leader, and the coin is a symbol. His smiling face shows political change, but the fact that his money shows how power and privilege continue. Here are the Fanon's key claims highlighted by Vishal. So here Fanon's says colonialism left an economy that unbalanced. So as we all know, in Wretched of the Earth, we also know about what is the what are the relations, or how the situation of national bourgeoisie and the native people. So Fanon wants that these class is selfish and weak, and they talk about independence but do not help farmer, workers, or other poor. So here Fanon's call is a decentralization, power spread out not only in the capital, and then political education, then participation by all people. These are the common diagnoses. So both texts see as a real danger of independence that preserve colonial inequality. Then both novel not the role of native middle class and alert the regime of the triple threat unity. So these are the different outlook that Caute mainly diagnosis dramatize problem. Then we shall argue that combining two perspective give us diagnostics and perception. These are my conclude observation. So Matthew Vishel's article is strong because it joins a novel and theory text together. So from the at fever pitch gives us character, scenes and image that make effect of colonialism very clear. And from the Fanon's novel gives us the theory. He explains how small nation elite can copy colonial rule and how real independence need mass participation and social change. These are a conclusion. Matthew Vishel's article shows that both David Caute and Frantz Fanon explore the same problem of decolonization, the danger that independence may only replace foreign rulers with local elite. And through Caute's at fever pitch, we see how colonial divisions and false progress continue after freedom. So through Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, we learn how true liberation needs social change, education and people's participation. So here Vishel's comparison teaches that fiction and theory can work together to reveal and question the incomplete nature of independence. It also reminds us to see literature as a form of political thinking, not only as a reflection of history. And these are my learning outcomes. I realized that literature like Caute's at fever does not only tell story but make political argument about colonial legacy. And my view of Fanon's change, instead of seeing him only as a writer of violence, I now see his constructive side, calling for social reform or an inclusion. And I learned how aligned modernity symbolize false progress and how colonial models can weaken new nations. These are my references, and thank you. If you guys have any question, feel free to ask.
So, Khushi, my question is, what is the meaning of the line, "These dogs will do as we say"?
Yes, Bhumi. The meaning of the line, "the dogs will do as we say," it means uh, for it means new African elites still act like indirect way former colonialism. So, for instance, in the Wretched of the Earth, national bourgeoisie's people, direct or indirect way, they help or support former colonies to rule and rule in the Algeria. So these way the meaning of the line is way to former or new Africans act like former colonies.
So, Khushi, my question is, what Marxist idea appears in both quote and fashion?
So, Marxist idea like a class struggle or or the uneven development of between poor and rich people. So these way Marxist idea appears in both the novels. So thank you. These are from my side.
My presentation topic is the feminist rewriting of Jane Eyre's The Meadow Women Speak in Jean Rhys' White Sargasso. In this both novel, one common words Bertha is used both Bertha Mason and in the White Sargasso also is the how to one woman recover with the speak and voices. These are the information, table of content. These are the research question. How does rise the wide Sargasso Sea function as the feminist rewriting Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, giving a voice to silence Meadowhaven and the challenging the patriarchal and colonial narratives. Wide Sargasso Sea and hypothesis. Wide Sargasso Sea reclaim the Antoinette subjectivity critics and the patriarchal and colonial oppression and demonstrate how the feminist rewriting can destabilize the colonial literary and narratives. Introduction. In the White Sargasso Sea in 1966 by the Jane Rhys is the frequently to the Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre in the 1847 in focusing on the life of the Bertha Mason and the renamed the Antoinette Causeway. This novel look this the 1 is the 1966 and second is the 1847. This time during the see the feminist movement is the influence in the White Sargasso Sea. The novel given the voice to perspective previously silenced Madwoman in the ethic, challenging the Victorian patriarchal narratives, and explore the theme of the identity, culture, hybridity, and the marginalized on the post-colonial Caribbean context. Is critic gender the oppressed, the critical hierarchy, and the instruction of the colonial and perspectival power of the structure. Feminist rewriting serve as the literary strategy to the bestialize the colonial authority and the provide the alternative perspective, highlight the psychological and the social conquest of the alienation, displacement, and the patriarchal domination of the women. These are the theoretical framework. Is some the Chandra Gilbert and the Susan Garb is the Meadow woman in ethics. Bertha Antoinette as the symbol of the suppressed female races. This quotation by this Meadow woman in literature not only the figure of the female races but also is the female equality. Is the how this condition of the humans like also Gilbert and the Gayatri Spivaks also in concepts in the Tory Moi and the post-colonial feminist lens, restriction of the gender, race, and colonial oppression, shaping the identity and marginalization. Historical and cultural context. Post-colonial Caribbean society in the colonial legacy. Jen Rice, Kroll, writer reflecting the cultural hybridity in the 1960 feminist movement and the woman struggle for the agency. This is the effect of the Jen Rice the writing, how female voice is the recover to the previous in the patriarchal society. Introduction, race, class, and gender shaping the identity, critique of the Victorian patriarchal norms and Jen Rice. Eyre. Colonial and post-colonial forces produce the marginalization. Meadow Woman in Ethic, Bertha in Jane Eyre's. Jane Eyre's is the novel how Bertha women suppressed to the not given the patriarchal society in voices. This the silence, violence, and the dehumanization in the Bronte's text, embodying the support, the race, and female rebellions. There is no looking glass here. Is the don't know what I am like now. What is I am doing this the place and how I am is the quotation by the Jen Rice White Sargasso Sea, a symbol of the patriarchal fear and control over the woman. Reclaiming the silence and female voices. Antonius give the narrative authority and White Sargasso Sea, transfer Bertha Mason from the mute Gothic trope and the speaking subjects in the challenging the patriarchal issue in the genres. Here the fragmented the voice, mirror and psychological trauma and cultural displacement. And feminist rewriting reclaim the feminist expression and truth. Critique of the patriarchal control, how the patriarchal society control the woman voices. Processor embodying the male dominant and the enlightenment. Marriage as the site of the conflict and the woman shaping. Is the marriage is the connection of the woman to the controlling is the like a wife is the controlling power of the main power of the husband. Endless body identity, fate, and controlling the patriarchy. And the challenges gave the label her maid and dramatizes others. Feministic lens, madness, social and construction of the not nature. Novel explore the how patriarchy destroy woman in agency. Instruction and of the race and colonial genders. In this time of the how condition of the female genders. Indigenous core woman to the between race and the cultural colonial hierarchy and deep with marginalized. Neither fully aspect by the white European and nor black Jamaican. Marriage is Rochester reflect the colonial perspective, position and woman. Instructionally, gender oppression and instructionally by the race and empires rise critically the both frequently colonization and integralization of system. Madness as the metaphor on oppression. In the both novel use the madness of the both characters, lady characters, are the how to suppress his voice through the madness. In the last is the genderized novel is the not uh, by the frequently madness, but last he is the creator madness of his mind condition. Antonius believe the madness due to practical precolonial and the colonial controls. Madness frequently psychological trauma from the old alienation and the position, nor horizon in the society and constructed by the through the male dominant. Highlight the society fear of the female resistance and autonomy. Express the pathology of the human distance. Feminist reading. Madness from the protest and surveillance narrative multiplicity and subjectivity. Novel use the multiplicity narrative, Antoinette and Rochester. It both characters give a multiple narration through the describing in the novel how woman voices to suffrages. Constructed female express versus male perspective highlight the how patriarchal narrative destroyed the human reality. Stream of consciousness technique empathize the subjective experience encouraged by the reading the question truth and the authority in the storytelling. Feminist reading narrative multiplicity towards the Antonius voice. Identity and cultural dislocation. Antonius struggle with the core identity in the blooding and cultural between the European and Caribbean society. In the both society, how to suppress the and to empower of the patriarchal society. In the power of dynamics and relationship. Rochester dominates the material and the romantic relationship, Antoinette agency, and suppress the control. And marriage is symbolized and position of the controlling. Symbolism and feminist identity. The symbol of the fire represent the destruction of the passion and female resistance. Is an ethic is the symbolize the confinement and the silencing of the human powers. And Sargasso reflect the Iceland and struck and the marginalization. Name of the Antonians versus Bertha is highlight the identity ensures in nature of imagery. Caribbean Iceland mirror the Antonian emotional and societal alienation. Uh, critic of the Victorian canon is the both known nearly connection, but the White Sargasso is the how the Victorian society to inflect of the norms, authority, narrative, and deniers express the gender and the radical silences in the anatomy of text and female rewritings. Okay. Critical learning, objective, and the analytical outcomes, and understanding how the Gen Ayers in the adaptation reflection the shifting the cultural adaptation on classic gender and colonialism. Analyze the Bertha Antoinette as the symbol of the suppressed female race, creativity, and the marginalization. Apply to female and the post-colonial theorist Gilbert's Gabbers and Spivak and Moy. The literature and the adaptation of study evaluate how Victorian threat reshaped by the Britain novel, popular expression, and the social exigence. Development skill of the comparative comparing primary text with the critical interpretation adaptation. These are the conclusion. White Sargasso reclaimed the silence voice of the Bertha Antoinette, the challenging the patriarchal and the colonial narratives embodied in the Jane Eyre's through the narrative multiplicity, feminist rewriting, and the exploration of the madness, right, restore the agency and the subjectivity to marginalized woman. The novel ultimately transformed to the Gothic meadow woman into the complex figure of the resistance, creativity, and empowerment. These are the references. Thank you. Any question? Feel free to ask.
Parthi, my question is, how does Jane Rhys White Sargasso Sea function as a feminist rewriting of Sherlock Bronte's Jane Eyre?
In Jane Rice is the in White Sargasso Sea is the recover the voices of the both novels character are the describing the meadow, but is the some freedom of this White Sargasso Sea's novels character female characters is the representing of the how the and sometime also he describing the is the name given by the Bertha woman is the both connection are the Bertha and madness both characters are the simply connection of the recovering voice of the White Sargasso Sea.
In what ways does White Sargasso Sea reinterpret the Madwoman in the attic, trope from feminist and post-colonial perspective?
As in a feminist rewriting also is the connective in the one novel is also in 18 in this time, but after this time 19 writing is the how woman's condition is the also given by the same voice in these novels. Okay, thank you.
Hello everyone, myself DHRUVIKA GOHEL. Today I will be presenting on my topic is post-colonial feminism in White Sargasso Sea. This is my personal information. These are table of contents. Research question: how does Jean Rhys portrays the interaction of gender and colonial oppression in White Sargasso Sea? And the hypothesis is Antoine's fragmented identity reflects the psychological consequence of living between conflicting racial and cultural worlds. These are information about author. Jean Rhys, born Ella Gwendolyn Rhys William in Dominica, was a Caribbean-born British novelist whose works explore aligned tension, gender oppression, and colonial displacement. Growing up between Creole and European cultures, she often felt like an outsider, a theme reflected in her novels such as Voyage in the Dark 1934 and Good Morning Midnights 1939, and here, greatest success came with White Sargasso Sea 1966, a feminist and post-colonial retelling of Bertha Mason's story from Jane Eyre, which earned here international recognition. Rice's lyrics yet a haunting style made her a power voice in 20th century literature, bringing feminist and post-colonial concerns. Introduction. Jean Rice, White Sargasso Sea 1966 is a prequel to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, retelling the story of Bertha Mason's rename Antoinette Causeway, set in post-impection Jamaica. The novel explores racial, cultural, and gender struggles root in colonial history. Unlike Brown's portrayal of a voiceless madwoman, Rice gives Antoinette here a perspective critiquing both patriarchy and colonialism. The novel highlights interaction of identity, race, gender, power, and colonial oppression. Antoinette's Creole heritage isolates here from both European colonizers and black Jamaicans, while Roster's dominations renaming here Bertha and silencing here illustrates patriarchal control. Through this lens, White Sargasso Sea exemplifies post-colonial feminism, showing how women's oppression is shaped by gender, race, and empire. Post-colonial feminism key concept. First is critique of Western feminism. Post-colonial feminism critiques Western feminism for assuming that women's experience are universal. It highlights that gender inequality cannot be separated from colonial history, race, and cultural context, pointing out that Western frameworks often overlook the layered oppression faces by women in post-colonial societies. Second is interaction of colonial history, race, and class. Women oppression is shaped not just by gender but also by colonization, race, and class. Historical process like imperialism disrupt traditional social structures and creating economic dependency and limited access to education for women in colonized societies. Third is agency, resistance, and voice. Post-colonial feminism emphasizes women's agency and resistance. Women actively negotiate, challenge, and redefine their roles, reclaim cultural identities, and participate in social and political movements, asserting their voice against the patriarchal and colonial legacies. Four goals. First is this dissenter Western feminist framework and highlight diverse perspective. Second is examine how colonial historize how unique shape gender relations. Third is prompt inclusion of race, class, cultural, and history in feminist analysis. Fourth is celebrate women's resistance, creativity, and capacity for self-determination. Uh, uh, Antoinette is a post-colonial feminist figure. Double migration. Antoinette faces oppressions both as a woman under patriarchal norms and as a Creole in a colonial context. Gender roles limit her autonomy, while racial and cultural hierarchies undermine her sense of belonging. Second is identify conflict. Her identity as a white Creole makes her outsider in black Jamaican society and the European world. She experienced prejudice, isolation, and pressure to conform to Western exploitation, creating constant tension in her sense of self. Post colonial feminist perspective. Antoinette embodies the struggles of women in colonial society. Despite being constrained by patriarchal and colonial forces, your stubble acts for resistance and search for selfhood reflect post-colonial feminism focus on women agency, voice, and resilience. Gender oppression and colonial oppression. Gender oppression is White Sargasso Sea. Antoinette faces patriarchal control that confines her to domestic roles and silence her individuality. Roster dominion symbolize male authority. He renames her Bertha, erasing her identity and forcing her into a Western mold. Her isolation in the attic reflect the complete loss of voice and agency under patriarchy. Second is colonial oppression. Colonial oppression set in post-slavery Jamaica. The novel portrays how colonialism creates racial tension and identity conflict. Antoinette's Creole family loses status amid social change, leaving her between two cultures rejected by both. Here, frustrated identity mirrors the psychological and cultural damage caused by colonial domination. Interaction of race, gender, and power is also mentioned, Parthiv, so I skip this. Resistance and agency, emotion and sexual autonomy. Although constrained by patriarchal and colonial forces, Antonia exercised small but meaningful act by autonomy. Her choice in love, desire, and personal emotion reflect struggle from resistance against the control imposed by roster and social expectation. Second is connection with Cuban heritage. And Antoinette attachment to her Jamaican environment, culture, and ancestry reinforces your sense of identify. This connection allows her to assert from the agency distinct from Western norms, grounding your resistance in your local and cultural context. Post-colonial feminist perspective highlights the resistance should be understood by beyond Western notions of liberation. uh, Antoinette action through limited and often internal demonstrates realization, self expression, and the assertion of identify within oppressive colonial and patriarchal structures. Significance in literature, voice to Margolia's woman. White Sargasso gives a voice to women silenced by both colonial and patriarchal system. Antonia represents the experience of colonial women and stories were historically ignored, misrepresented. Challenge to Eurocentric narrative. The novel acts as a prequel and critic of works like Jean Eyre, challenging Eurocentric perspective. It exposes the racial, cultural, gender biases and traditional European literature, reframing stories from the viewpoint of colonized and marginalized. Fusion of feminist and post-colonial critics, the novel merges feminist analysis with post-colonial consequence. It explores how gender, race, and colonial power interact to oppression of women, emphasizing struggle, agency, resistance within historical and cultural context. Conclusion: White Sargasso is a landmark in a post-colonial feminist literature, exploring the complex oppression of women in colonial context. Through Antoinette's story, it highlights the interaction of gender, race, and colonial power, showing how patriarchal control and cultural displacement marginalize women. Yes, subtle acts of resistance, emotional autonomy, connection to Caribbean heritage, and self-exertion demonstrates reliance and agency. By challenging Eurocentric narrative and centering marginalized voices, the novel provides a powerful lens on women's oppression and resistance in post-colonial societies. These are references. Thank you. Now you feel free to ask a question.
My question is, in what way does the Rochester represent the colonial power?
Roster embodies the imperial mindsets by controlling, renaming, and objectifying Antoinette and mirroring colonial domination. Next question.
Dhruvika, my question is, how does the novel reflect post-colonial feminist here?
It shows how colonized women face unique oppression shaped by race, cultural, and history, reflecting of post-colonial feminism theory. Thank you. This is my side.
Hello everyone, myself PALEDHARA. My today's presentation topic is hashtag on voice and narrative power in 4. Here is my academic information, table of content. This content we will follow, and research question. My research question is, how does JM Coexist 4 function not merely as a post-colonial writing back, but as a prophetic metacritic of the systematic narrative inequalities that contemporary on voice movement confront? And my hypothesis is, I contend that four is a diagnostic narrative that prefigures the on voice crisis. The novel systematically dramatizes how the Western literary appear is structurally designed to consume, distort, and silence marginalized story through the failed quest of Susan Barton and the irritable silence of Friday. Coetzee does not offer a solution but performs the very problem of narrative appreciation, arguing that the struggle for the right to tell one's own story is fundamental struggle for political and existential power. And what is on voice? The modern demands for narrative self determination. On voice is a term and a movement that demands the right for marginalized people to tell their own stories. It is created in 2015 by young adult author Crane Davies. She is a co-founder and editor of Disability in Kidlit, as well as the organizer of the On Voice hashtag, a Twitter hashtag to recommend book about diverse character written by authors from that same diverse group. By Dewey's state, a story is usually better done by people who have had an experience themselves. That kind of no barrier, and it argued that most authentic and nuanced representation come from live experience. And this modern movement is the latest chapter in a very old story. James Coetzee 4, published in 1986, dramatized the violent struggle over narrative power that one on voice movement seeks to resolve. This novel, who has the novel asks that who has the right to tell the story, and who controls the narrative, and what is the lost when the power is abused. And the introduction, the ethical imprevention. On voice is not not a trend but an ethical imperative rooted in a long standing political struggle, captured by the disability rights principle, nothing about us without us. In literary term, it fulfill the need for books or to act as a both mirror for self identification and windows into others' lives. Coexist for serve as our foundational case study, demonstrating the consequences when his the principal is voted and the narrative gatekeeper control marginalized stories. Susan Barton, the complicated seeker of unways. Susan embodies the struggle for narrative autonomy, but it's compromised her own position with power structure. She rightly demands authorship for her own story, fighting the patriarchal gatekeeper of foe. However, her struggle is complicated by her own position. While oppressed as a woman, her witness grants her a colonial power over Friday. She thus become a stark example of intersectional complicity, demanding demanding narrative autonomy for herself, while systematically dying into the more marginalized order, and revealing that the fight for voice is not simply binary. Friday's muteness, the unspeakable subaltern. Fridays represent the ultimate limits of on voice, the subaltern voice. Authentic experience is structurally incompatible with colonial narrative forms. Friday embodies to
the subaltern who experience is structurally implicable with colonial narratives. His cut out tongue symbolize not just a silence but active ensure. However, we must reject seeing him as merely a passive victim. His silence is not empty, it is a meaningful refusal articulated through his dance, flute, and petals. A language is oppressed, cannot comprehended. Quid's radical point is that Friday's truth is an unnarratable with their framework and the very demand that they speak on their terms is the final act with epistemic violence. Daniel Foe, the archetypal gatekeeper, Foe embodies the unethical publishing industries, prioritizing marketability over authenticity and failing as an ally. Daniel Foe personifies the unethical literary gatekeeper. He is not an ally but a curator of marketable trauma, reshaping Suzanne and Friday's truth into palatable fiction. As Rickel argues, his this literary humanitarianism, Suzanne's the very sustainability its claim to help, for thus become the archetypal of publishing industry that commodifies marginalized voice, prioritizing commercial appeal over authentic representation, a dynamic the own voice movement directly confront today. A metafictional climax, the violence of interpretational, the novel ending implicate the reader in the ethical violence of consuming marginalized stories. Coexist climax reveals interpretation itself as an act of violence. Friday's story escape as the unreliable slow stream into the ocean, the pure unnarratable truth forever lost to the colonial framework. In dining our desire to hear his story, coexisting makes us complicate with foe, forcing us to confront our own roles as consumers of marginalized trauma. Coexist authoritarian paradox, a metacritic. Coexist does not appropriate the subaltern voice but perform a diagnostic critique of the system that necessitates on voice. Coexist narrate a crucial paradox as a white author. She is coming from South African. He avoids appropriation by making the system of silencing his true subject. He doesn't speak for a Friday but dramatize the very act of speaking for as an exercise of power. Four is the thus a metacritic, a diagnosis of the narrative inequality that makes movement like on voice necessary, not an attempt to provide a solution. My learning outcome and the enduring warning the four. I can through this research I can deconstruct how the Western literary aperture is structurally designed to consume or silence marginalized narrative. Also, I can explain how figures seeing narrative power like Susan Barton can simultaneously become complicate across within the border power structure. I can also why Friday's muteness is not absence of voice but a powerful intimated and a form of expression unreliably by colonial term, and recognize the ethical dilemma of the reader's role, acknowledging our complicity in demanding and consuming narrative of marginalized trauma. Conclusion, demand for own voice is the last front in centuries old battle. Narrative powers a battle that coexists for map within a devastating process. For reveals the novel stand as the powerful warning. It teaches us that the ethical pursuit of storytelling is not about forcing the unspeakable to speak, but about dismantling the structure that creates silence and learning to listen to the form of expression that already exists, waiting to be recognized and their own terms. This from my side, these are the references. If you have question, feel free to ask.
My question is, could Friday's silence be just a look of agency? Are we romanticize his victimhood?
Point is valid, but Friday is active, not a passive. He communicate through his dance and music. His refusal to speak, it is his way to protecting his story to become become twisted. He is not romanticize his victimhood, but it is resistance uh, uh, towards the refusal.
Rutvi, my question is, where do we go from here? If FOI is shows us the problem, what does a solution look like in practical terms?
uh, it is not about the solution, but it is not about solution to forcing the silent to speak. It is about the system. It should be changed and should able to give the chance to speak. For example, as the reader, we can choose the poem, we can choose the book like own voice, and as a publisher we should allow or hire editors who wrote about own voice and take that as a main text. And as everyone, we can say that we should choose that type of book which recommended, as sir mentioned, try newer genre. Not but if you are reading Dr. I.K. Vijayawada, do not read throughout every book, but other writer you can refer, and this way you cannot particular genre. You can choose now this term is the new, so we can choose this genre to read, and it is not about practical, it is about humanity. So
So hello everyone, myself JYOTI, and today I am going to demonstrate intertextuality as a resistance writing back to the empire in James Cause's 4. So here are academic and presentation details, table of content, research question. How does James Cause's use intertextuality in 4 to challenge his colonial authority and reclaim silenced voices from Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe hypothesis? Cause's 4 employs intertextual rewriting as a post-colonial strategy or resistance, transforming Robinson Crusoe's imperial adventures into a critical of authorship, power, and historical ensure. By centering marginalized figures like Susan Barton and Friday, Coetzee exposes the colonial biases of colonial literature and reclaims narrative spaces for oppressed. Here it is a context of quizzes and 4. In this slide, here is about James quizzes 4 as a response to Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. So I believe that you all know about this, that's why I'm skipping it. Understanding intertextuality. So intertextuality is it is a connect one text to another one, it may references, echoes, or reshapes another, creating meaning through literary connections. Here are function initially creates dialogues between texts. So dialogues are make difference between two texts, and another one is critics earlier narratives and ideologies. It is questioning another text, previous text, and along with rewrites history from new or a marginalized perspective. Additionally, amplifies silenced voices excluded from dominant discourses. engages in intertextuality dialogue with DeForest Robinson Crusoe, uses rewriting, questioning colonial authority, and give voices to the silence, like Friday and Susan Barton. Transforms the colonial adventure story into a post-colonial reflection on truth and authorship. Rewriting Crusoe's. So in DeForest Crusoe, he was like a heroic and self-relevant survivor who was embodies colonial values. It represents the imperial ideal or mastery, reason, and civilization. A position of Friday as the silent, inferior other, and Quidsis Crusoe in four. It is fluid, limited, and morally ambiguous. Stripped of heroism and certainty, silent about colonial violence and exploitation. His island becomes a site of moral empathies rather than a conquest. So coexist undermines imperial glorification, exposes how colonial narratives silence subaltern voices. Through rewriting, he transforms adventure into allegory, questioning truth, authorship, and power. Friday's voice and silencing. So Friday was represents the colonized subject, silence and dehumanizing in DeForest Robinson Crusoe. In four, Quidzi turns Friday into a symbol of voicelessness under colonial domination, silence and power. So missing tongue, which signifies the ensure of a native language identity and history. Silence become from the resistance, refuse to speak the colonized language. It exposes gaps, absences, and mistranslations in colonial discourses. Uses Friday's silence to question who can speak and who is spoke for. Reclaims the human presence of the silence other without the pretending to speak for him. Susan Barton is intermediary. Susan Barton is an outsider and narrator who tries to tell her vision of events. She seeks truth and authorship, but depends on the male writer to record it. Struggle for voice represents the female and colonial struggle to write back against dominant power. And her story reshapes by patriarchal and imperial control. This character, Susan, is asked two questions. Who gets to tell history and who voice counts? Her uncertainty authorship exposes how women's are colonized voice are often silenced or rewritten. Colonial authority and narrative control. For relevant to the history in not neutral but shaped by colonial power and exclusion. The archives reflects imperial authority, deciding what is recorded and what is silenced. In Quidze's novel, Europeans hold narrative authority. Susan and Four shapes the story while Friday remains voiceless. This mirrors shows colonial discourse control representation and defines truth. Through the metafiction and rewriting, Quidze's exposes gaps and absences in colonial narratives. These textual voids become a site of a resistance where silence voices like Friday's haunt the official story. Themes of resistance. So four rewrites Robinson Crusoe to challenge colonial narrative and authority of the canon. Coexist uses silence and fragmentation. Power of storytelling. Storytelling becomes an act of a recovery of erase of silence histories. Susan Barton attempts the narrator. Her Friday's story exposes the biases of official archives and how truth is constructed. Intertextuality as a decolonizing practices by rewriting default text. It questions imperial authority and reclaims narrative shapes it. The novel turns literature into a site of ethical resistance. So Friday was a loss of Friday was represent loss of voice and identity. Written by the his silence is written by the powerful, and it shapes spaces of a meaning. Narrative gaps, the missing of unclear parts. Susan story invites reader question to authorship, and Koichi uses gaps to disrupt traditional storytelling. and the readers' active participations, interpreting what cannot be fully told. So Susan's incomplete accounts exposes the limits of authorial control, and by blurring truth and fiction, Koizzi undermines the authority of the author and highlights freedom in interpretation. The incompleteness itself becomes the symbolic of fragmented history and human uncertainty. Postcolonial reclaims the silence of voices and colonial texts of Robinson Crusoe, asserting the postcolonial agency. In Crusoe, there is intertextuality, and through the character of Defoe, he's just try to shows that how he is apply intertextuality in it, and the novel concerns voices, authorships, and representation mirror global decolonization in literature, education, and media. Conclusion. So James Quedge's Four transforms Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe into a powerful act of literary resistance, using intertextuality to expose how history, authorship, and truth are shaped by colonial power. By giving spaces to silence voice like Friday and exploring the struggle of Susan Barton to tell her story, Quidze dismantles the authority of the imperial narrative and invites reader to question who controls meaning. The novel ultimately shows that rewriting the past is not only the artistic act, but also a moral and political one, where silence, absence, and reinterpretation becomes tool for reclaiming identity and challenging the legacy of empire. So these are references. Thank you. Now, if you have any questions, you can ask.
My question is, what is the purpose of ambiguity info?
So in 4, there is so many things are unclear. Like we don't know about this island, never know about island, and also Friday's about Friday's history and Susan Barton's story. Through these, we also find that ambiguity, and he wants to show the real history. That's why he that is the main purpose of ambiguity and 4. And so many things are hidden in colonial era. So.
Jay, my question is, how does 4 blur the boundary between effect and fiction?
So in 4, we can find that so many things are looking real, and so many things are looking like a story. As a Defoe, so many things are looking a story. So in colonial old writers who were rewrite their stories to making it real. So also between fact and fiction, this Quidzi is trying to give an also from I want to give one example that Defoe was a real writer, and Foy is a unreal. So this way, Quidzi is also trying to show this. Thank you, sir. This was from my side.
Hello everyone, my name is KHUSHI Makwana. Today I am dealing with the topic the role of silence, absence and the unspoken info. My personal information, table of contents. My research question is how do the silence, absence and the unspoken function as a narrative and the political strategies in 4? Hypothesis: in the 4, silence and absence are not voids but active forces that challenge the authority, highlights the marginalization and the complete readers to confront the ethical questions of the voice and the representations. The introduction of author and novel, as we all know, so I skip it. Uh, Theoretical background, the silence in literary theory. Silence is the rhetoric, ethical, and the political. Postcolonial lenses, the subaltern voice, often the silence. Bonji, the silence as a space of potential voice in the coexist writing. Wrinkle, ethical consideration of the speaking for the silence in the literature. Silence info. Friday's silence, tongue cut out, resist the assimilations, symbolize the colonized voice, denied speech. Susan's Barton, attempt to the speak for Friday, revealing mediations and the power structures, the narrative function, the silence driven the tension and the ethical reflection. Absence in the narrative structure, missing character and the voice, like Friday and Susan's daughter. Here we see the Susan's daughter is missing, and missing voice of Friday. That we all know he was tongueless in the novel. Narrative gaps highlight the limit of storytelling. Author figure 4 tries to impose the order. Absence remains the showing power of imbalance. Absence as a structure device encourages the reader engagement. The unspoken in power, Susan's hidden past shaped her narrative authority. Force control reflects the colonial authorial dominance. The silence function both as the oppressions and the resistance. Raises the ethical question that who has to right to speak for others. Contemporary relevance, the postcolonial study marginalized the voice often the eras, trauma and narratives, the certain experience, the remain the unspeakable. Modern politics and the media, silence and the absence reflect the oppression or the strategies resistance. 4 is the lens for the reading ethical silence today. Conclusion, silence, absence, and the unspoken in the 4 function as the active elements rather than the mere voids. They serve to challenge the narrative authority and to draw the attention to marginalized voices that are often the excluded from dominant discourses. Through these strategies, Coetzee reminds the reader that the certain silence cannot and should not be overwritten, empathizing the ethical responsibility of the attending to the what remains unspoken in the narrative. Listening to the unspoken, my perspective on the silence info. I agree that the silence, absence, and the unspoken in the 4 are powerful and meaningful. Coetzee uses the Friday's silence not just as a oppression but as a resistance and the energy. I believe silence in the novel teaches readers to respect what cannot be spoken or explained. It reminds us that some truths exist beyond words, and the ethical reading means listening to those silence instead to trying to fill them. Here are my references, and thank you. If you have any question, then feel free to ask.
My question is, what role does gender play in shaping silence and the unspoken info?
Here we see the gender roles. As Susan Barton is a female character, and he criticized the male character like Daniel Defoe, that how the situation like colonial people and the woman are same. They both treated as the slave, and how the voice was not that type as we see the Friday's character is also tongueless, but as a female she also feels tongueless because of authority and word. Next.
So, Khushi, my question is, how does quizzes use metafiction to emphasize silence and absence in four?
Coetzee used the metafiction as a represent of the Friday's character. Like Friday is tongueless, but while we see the energy of meaningfulness, like he was tongueless, but here the uh, force force of we see that even he tongueless, but we also sympathize their situation, and we also getting idea about the colonized people also. So here the subject as Friday, he represent as the colonized peoples. So this is from my side, and thank you.
So, hello everyone. I'm going to discuss the whisper of the marginalized, narrative authority, and the politics of silence in 4. Here, academic information, table of content. My research question was that in James Coetzee 4, how do Fridays silence the narrative authority experienced by Susan Barton and the 4? And the novel's metafictional structure interrogate colonial power, challenge the conversational storytelling, and and transformation reading into a morally and politically responsible act. Here, the hypothesis that 4 demonstrates that the act of storytelling is inseparable of the power of representation. Friday silence embody the marginalized voice that resists in the colonial and interpretation, while Susan Barton and Foe exemplify the way of narrative authority can override of colonial this was through the metafiction and epistolary technique. Implicates readers in the ethical politics of interpretation, urging them to acknowledge unprecedented experiences, respect silence, and the question both historical and literary authority. Ultimately, the novel positions silence as a form of resistance, transforming reading into an ethical act that exposes colonial domination and the moral responsibility inherited in narrating or interpreting the life of the oppressed. Here the introduction, like which is published in 1986 by J.M. Coetzee, interrogate who has the power of tell story. This novel was formed in epistolary form, that how Susan Barton write later and tell her story. Mr. Fo, these are the central concern that a narrative authority like political of silence, ethical reading. Here the like narrative authority, the right of the shape or story, that how writer can shape the story, how story and in which manner he tells story is a very important political of silence, like how marginalized voice are excluded or misinterpreted. In some of work, like also that some of voice are suppressed by the colonizers, like ethical reading, the responsibility of the readers to respect what cannot be fully expressed. Sometimes readers also have to reader also have to think that what is main idea of that story which is not represented, like also that uses metafiction and epistolary form as discussed. Also Marias call this interpretive authoritarianism, the attempt to dominate meaning parallels colonial control. Also connection to the post-colonial theory, like Friday silence exemplified the Spivaks, like can the subaltern speak? The colonizer cannot fully express their experience in the language of the colonizer. Like a Friday silent resistance and presence, like Friday is missing tongue, symbolize the violence and the injury of the colonizer. Here the missing tongues means that he was a black person, that how white person how white person's power control him. Like silence is not lack but a form resistance and presence. His body communicates meaning without words. Gesture, posture, and reaction become a counter narrative. Textual example like Friday's resistance. Susan attempts in interpret him. The final underwaters in like the bubble symbol, the unspoken his stories. Also, scholar insight like Bonge argue that Friday embody the unlikeness, the irreducible differences that cannot be fully exemplified into a colonial language. For the like silence language, the colonial assumption and experience can be captured in words. Narrative authority, like who tells the story. So Susan Barton writes later to tell her story, but depend on Foe to publish it. Foe rewrites Susan's letter, reshaping the narrative to fit Robinson Crusoe's familiar colonial story. Hierarchy of storytelling mirrors colonial power structure, like Foe, who is a colonizer imposing controller. Susan is an intermediary whose story is filtered. Friday, the colonized, silence, and the misrepresented. Text for the force rework Barton's narrative, erasing Friday's agent, as well as we all know that in Robinson Crusoe there is a main character was a Robinson Crusoe who is a white person. There is another character is a Friday who is a black people, but Daniel Defoe's main focus on Robinson Crusoe, not on a Friday. But here in the Foe, we all know that Friday as a black person and Susan as a one. We can say that in a feminist perspective, both are the central character. But Robinson Crusoe was not main character here, and that in the Foe also Coetzee give voice of that Susan and the Friday, like a narrative authority is politics, controlling story, like controlling history and identity. Metafiction and the reader's role, like a Foe is a self-reflective, reflecting on the how story are created and interpreted. The epistolary form directly address the reader, making them aware of their creative power. Like the narrator dives into the shipwreck to hear Friday's silence. Readers experience the limits of understanding, realizing how they cannot fully master in text. Myra is called this reading as a colonization. Interpretation involve power over the text, similar to colonial domination. Implication like ethical reading, inquire, acknowledging limits, and the resistance is the urge to impose meaning. Like Susan Barton, ambiguity of agency. Susan is both express and potential oppressive. She tries to give voice to Friday, but inadvertently silence him further. Also, Barton interprets Friday's gesture to create a story she can tell. Her version of event reflect her own perspective, not Friday's reality. Coexist highlight the ethical of representation. Even well-meaning storytellers can impose authority. Connection to post-colonial theory, like a subaltern voice of risk, appropriation even by alliance. Reading as a colonization, interpreting a story like a political act of power. Friday's unlikeness, resistance, exemplification attempts to make him like us, erase a difference. Tries to impose narrative structure on Barton and Friday's story. Also, the representation itself can be form of colonization when the marginalized made to fit dominant narratives. Language and power. So we all are aware about that novel, that how white people control that black people, like intentionally or unintentionally. Susan Barton somewhere tries to tell story of Friday, some kind of unspoken story, which we can say that she also tried to try to control Friday. Ethical listening and representation, also that in the text there is a line attempting to give voice of Friday is colonial appropriation. Here the main focus on the marginalized voices, speak through the silence and the present, not always through the words. time also that sometimes also silence speaks more than words. Here are the example of Friday. His action, his action and his body language tells more than their voice. Conclusion: in four, Coates explore the colonial power, storytelling, and whose control history. Friday's silence represent marginalized voice, also resisting interpretation, while Susan Barton and Poe show how narrative's authority can be silenced others. Also, in Caresiolus observed that Friday's silence is not absence of the language, but the presence of a language. We do not yet know how to hear, emphasizing that silence itself carrying political and ethical significance. Here, the learning outcome, like a silence can be strong and express a resistance. Also, telling a story can shape history and identity, respect difference and unspoken experience, and like a metafiction, and later makes reader aware of their own role. Here are the references, and thank you. Now, if you have any question, then ask freely, please.
So, Kumkum, how does Poe use silence and storytelling to show marginalized voice struggling to be heard?
So, in the Robinson Crusoe, also show the voice of marginalized people, like a Friday who cannot speak. Sometimes, like a author have that authority to how to write their work. They decide to the voice we have to give which person and how to tell a story. But in the four also we said that for give their voice to the like marginalized people, like a four, and some kind of a Susan is a feminist perspective, that how female also can write a story, and Friday as a black people, as a marginalized people, how he raised their voice. So yeah.
Kunku, my question is, how does coexist for shows power decides which stories are told and whose voices are ignored?
So yeah, it is a very important, like we see in a Robinson Crusoe. So Daniel Defoe give voice of Robinson Crusoe, not Friday, who is a marginal, who is a colonized people, but he tells story that dead people. But we see in the four, like James Coetzee give a voice of marginalized people, black people, Friday. So it is a very important to, as a writer that how he can represent his story, and in their story he gives who are the main character and what is he tells. It is a very important. So yeah, this is from my side. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to dealing with the topic the silence of Friday and the silencing of refugees, a post-colonial reading of Poe in the age of migration. Here is my academic information, table of content and research question. Is that how does the silencing of Friday and coexist for reflect the systematic marginalization, refugee voice in contemporary media and global migration context, and what does this reveal about continuity of subaltern suppressed from colonial to modern times. Hypothesis is that Friday's enforced silence info symbolize the broader pattern of subaltern marginalization which persists in the age of migration as the refugees' voice are often mediated, misrepresented or ignored in media and policy discourses, demonstrating that historical structures of power and silencing continue to shape whose stories are heard and whose are suppressed. Introduction. Friday is a character in Foe by James Coizzi, forcibly replaced and rendered speechless, voiceless in other narratives. Refugees today often endure similar silencing. Their stories are told by media, governments, NGOs, not always by themselves. Friday's silence in Foe serves as a metaphor for structural suppression of refugees' voice in news, media, and public discourses, which post-colonial theory helps us to understand and critique. Foe in Friday's silence. So Susan Barton tries to repeatedly to articulate Friday's story and give him speech, but Friday's voice remains mediated, interpreted, and constrained by Susan, Crusoe, and Foe. Robert Cusack argues in arguing for that unheard search of Friday in James Coizzi's Foe that the whole enterprise of giving voice to natives and unachievable and totally objectionable, favoring the subaltern silencing being perceived in terms of triumph and victory over the dialectical power. These writers are L. Idrisi, L. Faith, and E.I. Hebok. In countering his story, the policies of silence view Friday's silence not passively but an active form of resistance. Theoretical foundations, voice, power, and the subaltern. Gayatri Spivak can speak. Subalterns are a people marginalized in power structures, even their representation in mediated by elites. Edward states Orientalism, the construction of the other by dominant discourses, representation is a political. Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, Colonial Violence, Displacement, Identity Loss. Fanon argues that colonialism not only exploit people physically but also damage their psychology and sense of identity. Colonial displacement and symbolic silencing. Friday's missing tongue in Foe symbolize the erasure of voice and identity under colonial domination. In the same way, modern refugees experience displacement and silencing in global narratives. The age of migration, in contemporary context. Global displacement trends. As of 2024, there are 170.3 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, including 42.7 million refugees. This marks as a significant increase from previous years to highlighting the growing scale of global displacement. Raising asylums applications, the number of asylum seekers has risen from 4.1 million in 2020 to 5.4 million in 2022, reflecting a more than 30% increase in just 2 years. A case study, Syrian refugees and US media frames partisan coverage. A research by these scholars analyzed that 47,388 US news articles from 2011 to 2019 about Syrian refugees. This study investigates that how political biases influence refugees' representation in American media. Left-leaning media frames that outlets like New York Times and Washington Post often describe refugees as a child victim as a symbol of suffering, emphasizing on humanitarian empathy, portraying America as a welcoming and responsible nation. Right-leaning media frames that outlets such as Fox News or Breitbart depict refugees as a security threat or Islamic terrorist. Focus shift from humanitarian needs to national security, creating fear-based narrative. So these same groups is presented through two conflict lenses, sympathy versus fear. Case study second, Syrian refugees in Turkey, human interest versus victimization. Dalia Abdelhadi and Fatmur Delioglu, human interest stories in the coverage of Syrian refugees, a case study from Turkey, Mashriq and Mazhar. The study examined that Zaman newspaper and found contradictory portrayals. Refugees were both victimized and humanized in Turkish media. Even when stories focused on compassion, the persistent uses of the refugee label erase individual and enforced collective stereotypes. Comparative framing, Ukraine, Afghan, and Syrian refugee crisis. It could have been media frames the coverage of Ukrainian, Afghan, and Syrian refugee crisis. This study compares how media and Europe in the UK portrays different refugee groups. News reports of Ukraine refugee situation have been marked by affectionate headlines and the outpouring of support and sympathy, arguing not seen previously in the context of the refugee crisis outside of Europe. A case study, Rohingya and international media and its effect. So, Rohingya Muslim minority Myanmar faced systemic violence and persecution from 2010 to 2020, forcing hundreds of thousands to flee to Bangladesh and other countries. Even though the New York Times and Guardian highlighted the crisis and created international pressure, the violence and displacement continued. This shows that media attention alone cannot fully amplify refugee voices. Their suffering is seen but not always addressed. Counter narratives and refugee agency. A comparative study of mainstream media and Twitter. Twitter provide more multifaceted narrative after event like Ellen Kurz's death. Mainstream media were more framed. Unlike the mainstream media, Twitter offered an alternative and multifaceted narrative not bound by geopolitics, raising awareness and calling for solidarity and empathy towards those affected. Here is a comparison between Friday and in this age of refugee voice in case studies. So Friday, who has no command of words and story, and his story also told by others, is like sometimes victimized or sensationalized, sometimes humanized, and sometimes ignored these colonized people. Critical viewpoints and limitations. So, Emily Burns in the Syrian refugee narrative states that refugees were depicted positively overall, but framing was dominated by government responses and conflict narratives, showing that even positive coverage carries limitations. From symbolic annihilation, study of media's near total absence of refugee voices during COVID points to passive silencing rather than active representation. This critics reveals that being heard in mean is not enough. How, by whom, and under what terms matter. Analytical insights. Friday silence and refugee silencing are not identical. Friday is a fictional and totally voiceless. Refugees have partial voice in many contexts, but structural similarity exists. Lack of control over narrative, being framed by others, having voice overshadowing or ignored. Refugees agency is emerging in counter narrative spaces. This acts as a species of refugee. Conclusion, coexist for give us a powerful metaphor of to understand modern refugee silencing. The case study shows that media both silences and partially amplifies refugees' voice, depending on framing, region, and politics. Policy media suggestion more refugees lead storytelling, more platform giving refugees control over their narratives, more awareness of framing. Here are my references, and thank you. Now, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask.
So, Krupali, my question is to you that what responsibility do writer and journalist have when representing silence communities?
Yes, so writers and journalists who are the voice of the people who are the subaltern and colonized. So they just don't
Okay, so we have this. Mic out. You can mute that mic. So we are facing some internet problem for a while. It will take 5 to 10 minutes in getting restored. That you can mute that mic. The voice will be going from this way. This is off. This is not connected. That is on, that mic. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Now you're not getting the sound. Output is not done. Okay. Okay. So by the time we get back internet, we can have a feedback to those who have already presented. So content-wise, things are going on quite well. And many of you are also presenting the learning outcome also. So that also is a good example that how you digital also. SANKET with about how you have to connect hypothesis with the given things there. There was this question of global south also. Global south in SANKET's presentation also it was given. So also needs to be seen in that context. So that we have to see. We are still not talking a lot about global south in this today's dynamics, where how the north, which is more developed, and the south, which is developing, what is the conflict between them? But in global south, we have India and China also, which are very big economies. So how that is addressed, and when we talk about colonialism, a kind of a suppression on the people, subjugation of the people, how will we see countries like China, which is coming from global south? We want to use that as anti-colonial, but what about the freedom of the people in those countries, which is global south? So that requires thinking also. Jyoti's presentation. So you're talking about conflict, cultural conflict, and then you want to see what is the effect of that on social and psychological. But exact examples were not given. That what is the social effect of cultural conflict? See all these words. What is culture? What is social? What is the difference between culture and social? That also should be very much clear in your mind, that how you differentiate between culture and social. And then the cultural conflict leads to social problems and psychological problems. So what are exactly those social and psychological problems on subjects? I hope now very clearly understood. Not citizens, but subject. Subjects are citizens. Subject also means Vishay. Kayo subject bhano cho. So here subject is a citizen, but they are not actually citizens. They are subjugated identity. So they are not given proper rights of citizens. That's why they are, the term subject is used for them. They are not proper. And our striving is to see that we are treated as citizens, not as subjects. So that now that is why we see global south. Are people being treated as citizens or subjects? Why they keep on agitating? People keep on agitating, and then again they go like we have seen in the presentation by violence. There we can see of science, BHUMI also talked about this point, violence, politics of violence, and that how we see the subjects being articulated. There were examples of farmers' agitation and also Ladakh agitation, which is going on there. So how do we see that all things, and what is the reshaping of identities that is happening here? So that context is very important to see. Now there are not this white people are not there. So we have got the internet back. We are just connecting the other systems. So which one is that? This is 3. This is 2. This is 1. Okay. Given answer to this question? This one.
So, Krupali, my question is, what role can literature play in the giving voice to the voiceless?
Yes, so literature giving voice to voiceless, because people who are marginalized, colonized people, and poor people are also ignored by journalists and historians, whose story is not that much popularized and told. So literature giving voice to those who are voiceless, and we have writers such as Koichi, Fanon, and Henry, who are also write on the colonized people, so they give voice to them. Okay, thank you. This is from my side.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to deal with the topic historical study of cannibalism with reference to JM Code 4. Here is my academic information. This is a table of content. My research question is how has the concept of cannibalism evolved from historical and anthropological practice to a colonial discourse of power, and how has it been represented in literature and visual art? The history of cannibalism, originally grounded in ritualistic and survival practice, was interpreted by colonial power. This shift in a meaning is reflected in a literary and artistic representation, such as J.M. Coetzee's Foe and Francisco Goya's Satan devouring his son, etc., where cannibalism served as a symbol of power, control, and human brutality. So in introduction, cannibalism has evolved from a historical ritual. So it some part it know as a ritual practices, at some it is for survival. That's how we find various perspective in this concept. And the ancient root of anthropology, or meaning of anthrophagy. So earliest evidence we find in archaeological remain from Spain and France show a trace of human consumption. In Greek origin, we have a Herodotus in 15th century BC described the anthrophagy. It means men eaters of Scythia as a savage and lawless, establishing early link between. Okay. So classical meaning of this concept, anthropophagy means anthropes, it show human, and phagin means to eat. When human eats another human's flesh, it known as anthropophagy or cannibalism, mark the symbolic divide between civilization and savagery. And cultural evolution we find in Europe. Expansion tale of man-eater appear across religions such as Scythia and Russia. And also we find this concept in a modern world. So the colonial birth of the word cannibal. So colonial function, European label native people cannibal to justify conquest and enslave. So whenever colonized people try to define colonizer try to define colonized people, they show them as a cannibal or brutal people. Then the cannibal trope has also been a great critical utility in post-colonial and post-modern discourse as the ultimate sign of epistemic violence. It also people connect with the violence and English colonists resorting to eating human flesh during the starving time of 1609 to 1610 in Jamestown, reported by John Smith, and the Governor George Percy broke down neat dichotomy of a civil Englishman and savage other. The discourse of cannibalism, which began in the encounter between Europe and America, become a defining feature of colonial experience in New World, especially in Pacific. Then Cannibal in Novel 4 by J.M. Coetzee. So in initial part, we find the one line of Susan Barton, that I have come to an island of cannibals. So how Susan Barton as a white people described the people as a cannibal. No pirates landed on our shores, no freebooters, no cannibals. Save yourself if you can be called a cannibal. So here we find the fear in Susan Barton that what cannibal can do. Was his talk of cannibal roving from island to island in search of meet a warning, a masked warning against you and your appetites. So these are the original light that show the element of cannibals in this novel. And when we apply this concept in a fourth, so cannibal is not just a literal, it symbolizes power, control, and moral ambiguity. So we go beyond the literal meaning and take the metaphor. Then we find that Four try to eat the voice of Susan Barton. So here we find the metaphorical meaning also. Then the Man Eating Myth, this book by William Eyre, written in 1979. It's a report of ritual cannibalism, where often colonized invention repeatedly, uncritically by Western scholar. So the purpose of the myth to identify civilized self against the savage other, to rationalize imperial expansion and religious conversation, and the impact is the cannibal become a discursive weapon in colonial ideology. So through this through the practice of cannibalism, the cannibals show as the discursive weapon in colonial idea. Then the types and non-ritual form. So here we find in various countries how they show the cannibalism. So in America it shows exo-cannibalism, where it used for a ritual purpose. Then in Brazil also it is the ritualized type for a revenge, veneration, and courage. In Oceania it shows the Indo-cannibalism. There a funerary veneration of kin we find, and in Europe we find a survival cannibalism during the time of famine or another thing. When we come to the major type of cannibalism, then one is endocannibalism, where the consumer member of one's own group. For example, a worry of Amazon River, act of mourning and spiritual incorporation. In exocannibalism, we find that eating enemies or outsider, when people defeat the another group and try to eat another group. Then in non-ritual form, we find survival, medicinal use, that human blood, bone, and mummies use as a cure in Europe. We find cannibalism and capitalism. So how this writer Zhu Yu's performance eating people show the quite contrary to guardian ourselves away from cannibal. On the other non-human side, we collectively are the allegorical cannibal in sense of both consumer and consume. Then the representation in art and literature. When we see the Gujarati novel Manvini Bhava, in this we find the concept of cannibalism in term of survival. When I mentioned the America and Oceania and Europe, that time we find that India is not there. But also in Gujarat, Pannalal Patel observed this thing and mentioned in this novel. Then second is the famous painting by Francisco Goya. In this, he used this concept. Also in the neoclassical novelist Jonathan Swift used this concept in a modest proposal. And my stands for cannibalism, that cannibalism is a right or wrong. When we see from the perspective of a colonizer, we find that they stand himself as a superior and think that no one can eat another human's flesh. And they think that those who are eat humans flesh, they are uncivilized. But in right way, we have to follow the chain of food. In conclusion, that cannibalism also show the vulnerability, but at one side we find the ritual and survival purpose also. Here is my references, and now you are free to ask question.
So, Krishna, my question is that can cannibalism ever be moral, survival, ritual, or symbolism?
As I mentioned that when cannibalism portrayed in term of survival and ritual, that is okay. Also, we ritual perspective and survival we find in India also and another country also. So that's how it symbolize or survive or ritual, etc.
So, Krishna, is cannibalism inherently savage, or it is a concept shaped by cultural bias and the historical context?
Yes, because those who people use to eat flesh of another human being, they think for a they only think for a survival at one point. But when white people or a colonizer try to imply that concept as an uncivilized and brutal people, then it complicated. So in a way, it shaped by a cultural bias and historical context. Thank you, everyone. This is from my side.
So, hello everyone, myself Khushi Ravya, and my today's topic is post-colonial theories in Bollywood films. These are my personal information. This is a table of contents. So my research question is, how do contemporary Indian films reinterpret post-colonial concepts of Orientalism, subalternity, hybridity, and national culture of challenge colonial and social hierarchies? And the hypothesis is Indian cinema uses post-colonial frameworks to transform narratives of oppression into expression of resistance and identity formation, and analyzing Indian films through post-colonial theories such as Said's Orientalism, Spivak's Subaltern, and Homi Bhabha's hybridity reveals how they challenge dominations, assert agency, and contribute to collective social and cultural consciousness. Introduction. Postcolonial theory examines how the legacies of colonialism continue to influence culture, identity, and power in the modern world, and drawing on the ideas of Anya Lumba, Edward Said, Gayatri Spivak, Homi Bhabha, and Frantz Fanon, and it's reveal how colonial domination shaped the system of knowledge, representations, and resistance. And the framework highlights the issues or race, gender, class, and nation, showing how formerly colonized society reinterpreted and reclaimed their histories. And within this context, Indian cinema serve as a cultural space where narratives of oppression are transformed into expression of resistance and identity, and formation reflecting the ongoing negotiation between colonial past and post-colonial realities. So, post-colonialism is the famous quote of Anya Lumba: "A new human utterance could be seen as innocent. Any set of words could be analyzed to reveal not just an individual but a historical conscience at work." In this book, he said about post-colonialism and examines the legacy of colonialism, including its cultural, political, and economic impacts, and explores themes such as colonial discourse, anti-colonial movements, and identity formation and interactions with gender and sexuality. So here is a theory, Frantz Fanon's theory and cultural and decolonization. And his famous quote is: "A national culture is the whole body of efforts made by a people to describe, justify, and praise the action through which that people have created itself and keeps itself in existence." His definition is national culture who shared values, belief, customs, dress, food, and social behaviors that define a nation. And his colonial impact is colonizers devalued native cultures, imposed foreign laws, and disrupted tradition, cause and culture suppression. And culture and nation impact on true liberations and requires reclaiming and pre-colonial national culture and resisting assimilation into European norms. And its African context is Western individualism and foraging, food, dress, religion, and education eroded communal African values. And Fanon's message is national consciousness is essential for culture renewal, and international influence flow from strong national culture. Other one is Orientalism theory. Then Edwards says that the Orient was almost a European invention, a place of romance and exotic begin haunting memories and landscapes. In this Edwards book, he critiques how Western disciplines, literature, history, and anthropology constructed the East as a inferior, exotic, and static to justify colonial domination. And it's bullied on anti-colonial was like Amy says it, and Michael Lyricis, who exports how Western anthropology served imperial interest. And he said extend this critique of culture text showing the European representation maintain epistemic control over colonized people. And Orientalism becomes not just a field of study but a political instrument shaping how the East is imagined, governed, and silenced. In Spivak's the subaltern key concept is subaltern refers to groups excluded from socio-political power and whose voices are silenced in dominated narratives. And in idea of subaltern as a difference and subaltern effect is emphasize invisibility or marginalized group under colonial and post-colonial regimes and focused on exclusion from social mobility. And its social relevance is moves beyond theory to analyze real world
and hierarchies and struggles, and offers a framework to study oppression, agency, and political exclusion. And Bhaba's hybridity and mimicry. In this hybridity, he emerged from cultural contact between colonizer and colonized, and it represent new identities and meaning formed in the in between, and is a challenge is colonial binaries. Uh, uh, and in mimicry, he said a colonized subject imitate the colonizer's language, dress, and behavior almost the same, but not quite. And mimicry destabilizes authority because imitation both affirms and mocks colonial power. Here, example of movie Lagan, who published in 2001. Here is a Frantz Fanon theory explores when the cricket match evolves into a symbolic site and anti-colonial resistance, and villagers are collective struggle. Transcends and caste and class and fosters nation consciousness, and when they victory signs culture pride and empowerment. Here also Edward says Orientalism is explored by film Lagan. Is early in the movie British offers portrait villagers and background help, and Lagan is a text symbolize colonial explanation and authority. Is also Lagan film also explores these both theories, and PK it's the Edward Orientalism theory and Homi Bhabha's hybridity theory are explored, and how PK is how behave, his language, dress, his rituals, his question are and his hybrid identity establish fixed categories of religion, nationality, and morality. And this article 15 movie is also connected to Frantz Fanon's decolonization theory and Gayatri Spivak subaltern theory. In this movie, Iron becomes a conduit for subaltern voices and highlighting politics of representatives, and he become a voice of subaltern people. In conclusion, postcolonial theory uncovers the lasting impact of colonialism on cultural identity and power structures while highlighting the voices and experiences of those marginalized by history. And thinkers like Lumba, Edward Said, Spivak, Homike Bhabha, and Fanon provides frameworks to analyze resistance and hybridity and context of such a Indian cinema. These ideas reveal how narratives of oppression can be reimagined as acts of culture reclamation and identity formation, demonstrating in the continuing relevance of post-colonial thought in understanding contemporary society. So these are my references.
So, Khushi, my question is: do you find another Bollywood film that reflect post-colonial theories and how it reflect?
Yes, there are several movies who explores post-colonial theory, like Rang De Basandi, who explores Fanon's decolonization theory, and other one is Swadesh, who explore Homike Bhabha's hybridity theory, and other one is Mother India. This film also explore Fanon's decolonization theory and Spivak's subaltern theory.
My question is that what role does language play in post-colonial identity formation?
Language play major role because language do both oppress and empower, and it's a help to natives to uh, it's a help to native to raise their voice, and also help to marginalize the people. Thank you.
And Arvind Adiga's The White Tiger, we hypothesize that literary narratives not only critique environmental injustice but also model resilience, surveillance, sustainable human ecological relationship relevant to contemporary climate crisis. So, climate crisis is considered as one of the most significant thing nowadays, and stories of power, memories, and justice. So, from the age of empire to the Anthropocene, the same system that exploited people have also exhausted the planet. And Anya Lumba reminds us post-colonial through must extend beyond history and politics to embrace ecology and indigenous survival. And within this expanded lens, literature become a witness, chronicling scars of colonial extraction, and imagining futures of repair and coexistence. So through these poems and novels and resistance narratives, writers transform climate changes from static into live human experience, a narrative of survival shared by both people and on the earth. So Lumba's direction towards the changing matter of today is that her studies now engage with climate change, colonial laws, and indigenous struggle. She has given arguments over this theories like Marxism and globalization, that these are not sufficient to answer today's questions of this planetary crisis. So she emphasizing on linking empire, capitalism, and ecology to understand our environmental collapses. And in this, she highlights that global south communicates face the worst impact. as global north bears historical responsibility for it. So by integrating environmental justice, indigenous knowledge, and global inequality into literature and cultural studies. So historical root of these things. So we have think of north globe and south globe. So industrial capitalism and empire by this north globe countries. This historical colonial carbon footprints, extraction of the mines and lands, then this all the phenomenon which links to historical power inequality and exploitation. And literature and culture narrative reveals this environmental harm as a historical injustice. And this perspective argues to recognize responsibility and rethinking these sustainable futures. Anya Lumba also argued on Dipesh Chakrabarty's the concept of universal humanity, like this climate change is affecting all equally. It is not affecting equally, but many like South global not facing problem more. So this how she arguing also. So here some of the narratives like from Amitav Ghosh, Hungry Tides and Gun Island. This narrative of survival shows the people of Sundarban how they confront cyclones, rising seas, and forced migration. Mirrors real climate crisis. Then it also highlights the need of rethinking human relationship with ecology. Then Arundhati Roy's Ministry of Utmost Happiness. It also shows marginalized voice, Dalit, Kashmiri Muslims, forest dwellers, and all the struggle and displacement by dams, militarization, ecological degradation. Then Arvind Adiga's The White Tigers. So it also shows Balram's rise from village poverty to entrepreneurial success, shows human cost of development. So here we find a globe inequality in climate change. Approximately North Globe is around 50% of responsible for historical emission. And also enjoys prosperity from the fossil fuels. Whereas this South Globe is suffer the most from this climate disaster, from floods, droughts, heat waves, and all these things. For example, here 135 million people could not be driven into poverty by 2030 due to climate change. Now inclusion, justice, and the role of policy. So it needs the needs for inclusive climate policies. Global South voices must be guide climate action. Instruments like Green Climate Fund aims for equitable North-South collaboration. Then narrative and stories that shows human impact, emphasizes urgency and survival. Then actions is also critical for this matter. So here I have taken data from the NASA's website that how the Earth's globe temperature in 2024 was 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the 20th century baseline, 1951 to 1980. So this record shows the global temperature and the thing. Then the glacier melting and floods and all this thing is happening to nowadays, as we are seeing in the news channels. Now digital colonization and green divide. So it's environmental inequality is not just physical but also digital, like control of data, technology, green resources by global north. They are rich countries, so they can take steps further, but whereas south has to suffer more. And then this green divide, developing nations are left out of sustainable transition. So this reveals issues. So way forward we can take that broaden the frame, we should take this issue significantly. Then human capability approach, we should focus on opportunity freedoms. Then inequality exposure, who suffers the first, we should look after it. Inequality impacts, inequality in recovery, we should see all these things. Now literature can play a major role here, like stories exposes how climate injustice and historical injustice implies voice of the marginalized. And policies plus cultural connection, like we have many SDGs goals. SDGs 10, which talks about reduce inequality, and SDG 17, which talks about climate action. So by merging working together on this, we can take some steps also. And our shared responsibility is there. So as Anya Lumba rightly connect these things, but it's our responsibilities also to play role in this. So in conclusion, climate change is both legacy of colonial exploitation and a product of contemporary globe consumption, highlighting shared responsibility across nations. So Lumba's post-colonial perspective helps us to see the empire, capitalism, and ecological crises are intertwined, while literature gives us voice to marginalized communities, documenting survival and imagining sustainable future for the globe. By engaging with post-colonial narratives, we can better understand the human and ethical dimension of climate inequalities and inspire action that promote justice, resilience, and collective accountability in addressing this climate change crisis. So these are references which I have taken. And now questions are welcome.
So my question is, what role do storytelling and fiction play in imagining sustainable future and environmental justice?
So, as discussed earlier, literature gives us lens, or it is providing a mirror to the whole globe. So, by the connection with this literature, or merging our this issue with literature, we can provide a lens to society for those who are marginalized and suffering the most.
So my question is, how do historical power structures influence contemporary environmental challenges in South Asia?
So, as we have discussed that North Globe is enjoying more, whereas South Globe is facing the problem more. But the thing is that now we should not repeat the like we are many times we are repeating the policies and the things which earlier done. So we should not repeat them, and but we should focus on the sustainable development towards this thing. So this was from my side. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone. Today I'll be teaching globalization and the cultural marketplace, homogenization or hybridization. Here is the table of content. Throughout the presentation, we will know what are the core differences between homogenization and hybridization. And throughout this, we will also make sure that we will get some views of Homike Bhabha and Stuart Hall. My research question is, does the process of cultural globalization primarily lead to homogenization or westernization, or does it result in a new mixed and multicentric central forms such a called as hybridization? My hypothesis is globalization's primary culture effect is not homogenization but creation of a new hybrid culture forms through a process of local negotiation, adaptation, and contraflows, thus the positioning of hybridization as a cultural logic of globalization. So first of all, introduction, we all know that globalization is generally defined as the process of increased interaction on a global scales, and economics is generally focuses on economic advancement and the worldwide technology. Then our core debate is homogenization and hybridization. So what is homogenization? When people generally believe that we or the country will be influenced by westernization or Americanization, and everything will be look from that point of view.
Yes, now you can share and start.
So our core debate is what is homogenization and what is hybridization. So as we all know that homogenization means to following a particular place or a country where people believe that that is an ideal country and we all must should follow it. While in the hybridization, people uses more than one country, place or things, like we can say that cultural interactions produces new mixed forms. Globalization is a global melange, a blend of cultural expression that coexist, adapt and evolve through the exchange. Its core homogenization's core concept is cultural standardization and cultural differentialism, while on the other hand, hybridization has its own core concept, which is cultural hybridity and contraflow. We can get an example of pizza in both references. When pizza was firstly invented or made in Italy, then when India was introduced with this, then people firstly homogenized with that reference. Like people start believing that it is our own and we can eat it. Then some people hybridize it, means some new vegetables are included in it. Then Homogenization, economic and cultural flattering, media and concentration. Disney, we can say that how Disney and Time, such a major companies, are creating some movies which are globalized, not a specific commodification and flattering. Homogenization promote consumerism and commodification of culture, leading to cultural flattering, where symbolic diversity gives way to market-driven sameness. This process links the cultural change to ideological neoliberalism. And cultural differentialism, people believes that of course there will be one country or people who will be influenced by other, so there is a chance of clash of civilization also, like everyone cannot be same. Then hybridization strategies for entering a modernity. Hybridization is a strategy. So Nestor Gracia Klinci defines hybrid culture as a strategies for entering and living modernity. It suggests that hybridization is a deliberate adaptive process, particularly among the marginalized group, allowing them to reshape modernity according to their own context. For example, the fusion of traditional indigenous music with global pop genres in Latin America demonstrate a hybrid creativity and cultural negotiation. Global cities, this type of hybridization we can watch in mega cities, not in a particular village or a rural site. Then disjuncture and flows, adopted Apadurai's scapes. So he just identifies the 5 landscape for the globalization. First is ethnoscape, where the flow of people reshape communities and cultural imagination. Second is ethnoscape. Technoscape, second is the uneven global spread of technology across the borders. Then financescapes, the rapid complex movement of global capital. Then mediascape, the circulation of images, stories, and media narratives shaping imagined world. And idealscape, the flow of political and counter-political ideas such as democracy or sovereignty. The creative space of hybridity. It was in work of Homi Kebaba, where he introduced the term the third space of enumeration. This is in between or a liminal space where the new meanings and identities are constructed. Hybridity within this space acts as a political force that displays the stories that constitute it and set up a new structure of authority and political narratives. This concept emphasizes resistance and transformation, not just cultural fusion. Then evidence of a cultural contraflow. Empirical evidence of contraflow, media and cultural products flowing against the Western dominance reinforces the hybridization argument. Multi-centric system. The emergence of contraflows shows that the global communication order is not indirectional but increasingly multi-centric. Negotiation, not domination. Global culture exchange represent negotiation rather than domination, as a local culture reinterpreted and export their creative products. Continue. Examples of new non-Western cultural flow. The global success of India cinema with vast audiences beyond the India. We can see it's in a movie like Bahubali or RRR, where they use some editing. Then here are some examples of it. Next, in the conclusion, the cultural logic of globalization. The global cultural debate moves beyond the binary of homogenization versus hybridization. Hybridization emerges the more accurate framework for understanding the globalization's cultural effects. Hybridization is the cultural logic of globalization. For example, we can take the Swadeshi movement, like in a particular time when the leaders or the peoples are saying that we should have to use our own things, like Swadeshi movement is going on. So we, as an educated person, we just have to taught them that it is not homogenization, but it is hybridization. Means there was in past times there was a chariot, but with the present with the technology, people also use the cars also. Then in terms of railway also, people like as shown in the Bhag Milkha Bhag movie, like people firstly oppose the idea of railway. એ લોકો એને લૂંટવાનો બી પ્રયત્ન કરતા, but then જે just in present term we are progressive country in railway road. Here are the theses which we just now I wind up things with references.
Bhargav, can you give an example of how multinational corporation contribute to the cultural homogeneization?
Yes, companies like McDonald's and Pizza Hut keep doing that. Like first of all, they just introduce a new food item and then make people familiarize with it.
So my question is, how does India demonstrate cultural hybridization in the context of globalization, and why does this challenge the idea of cultural homogenization?
Because India does not only merely copy it, but it adapts and reshapes them, creating a unique Indian identity. And thank you.
Hello. Okay. So that was the last one. Okay. We are given feedback in between also. So continue from that. BHUMI presented well on this violence, and we are talking about this violence by Fanon, article discussed by many of you in that. I think KHUSHI also talked about Gandhi reference also. So there are several articles which tries to see both in opposite, Gandhi and Fanon, how they talked about the post-colonial argument with violence or without violence. There. KHUSHI GOSWAMI presented a good article also, dog reference that was there, which was a good article, which gives us that point that how after the colonial masters leave, then what will happen to the people, internal one. So how the people tend to say that once they will go, these people will be our dogs. So who is speaking this? The middle class, bourgeois class, the middle class, who is going to be the owner of the land, the resources, and everything, and that is going to exploit that. So that point also is a very significant point, wherein we extend the post-colonial into contemporary times, that how now the people still gets subjugated by their own people. So why the fight that was there with the outsider, the European imperialist, the similar way it continues also in today's time. You can also refer to the reference of Gita's violence, Bhagavad Gita's solution, that ultimately you will have to use weapons like Yuddha Ej Kalyan. So how the Gandhi was a believer in Bhagavad Gita, but still he was not ready for Yuddha Ej Kalyan. So what is the problem? Why Fanon psychologically says that violence is necessary. It gives a kind of a psychological freedom to people. So without violence, when we achieve something, perhaps something is lacking in us. We are not satisfied completely. So is that what is happening with a country like India, which on the one side wants to say that we are free because of non-violence, But then the people still say that no, we want to prove that it was the violence that has given us freedom, or we are not happy with that idea. So all anti-Gandhi sentiments which are beaming up in India can be read in this context also. There is one article by Neelam Srivastav which tries to talk about this, where in that article it has brought this point together. So this is in Journal of Postcolonial Writing. Let me share this. Journal of Postcolonial Writing, Migration and Terrorism. In that, this passage that it's talking about Fanon, and then even Gandhi claimed that it would be better to kill than show cowardice, which implied a moral failure greater than violence. So if the choice is set between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence. I praise and extol the serene courage of dying without killing. Yet I desire that those who have not this courage should rather cultivate the art of killing and being killed than basely to avoid the danger. So that is cited. So admittedly, this is a rare passage in Gandhi's writings. Very rare that somewhere he preferred violence. But it serves to illustrate how violence itself acquires an ethical stance in situations of colonial and neo-colonial conflict. This neo-colonial conflicts, that is also significant. This utopia, anomalous violence, which arises out of a specific contingency, bears no relation to the violence of the colonizer, being different in its very quality. So how one can think of the reference of purifying through violence, how to distinguish between purifying violence, that point this article is trying to refer to. So this might have been referred, and more stress might be given to this stance that today, after all this years, how we see the relevance of Fanon's article or Fanon's view of looking at violence. Parthiv, you still need to improve the speech, keep on speaking a lot and practice more. DHRUVIKA, some of you are still not using articles from honors. Some of you have started referring to T and F articles. So those who are not doing, you are again suggested. It will obviously improve the quality of your writing. If you refer to 2 good articles, your quality will obviously become better. Also, Gestor also, many of you are using those articles. In DHRUVIKA, I was not able to find that. Quality journal. You cited some journals, but the quality was questionable. RUTVI also presented well on this hashtag on voices. That also is a good way to look at the movement which happened on social media regarding such kind of writings, where people are talking about their own lived experience, the people coming from marginalized identities, and they have their first-hand experience of that. So own voices there. This and many other articles talked about storytelling. When we read retelling, it is obviously raising a question against the very idea of storytelling. So who has the right to tell a story? Whose story is representing? Whose story is misrepresenting? So that all question that keeps on coming in many of your reading. So what is written, and in retelling we see what is not written. Where are the absences? Where are the silence? So retelling comes there. So we come to know that all kinds of tellings has bound to have some problems. Whatever way we try to be objective, unbiased, without any prejudice, it is nearly impossible that we can be free from everything. And after 100 years or so, somebody will obviously retell the things. There might be gaps which is impossible for us to see the things there. But are we making a deliberate attempt towards those gaps or not? That is a very important question. That we try to see that the gaps might be there and how we try to fill those gaps. That comes in retelling or retelling stories. Jay also presented on foe, on how the resistance comes through storytelling. Kumkum on marginalized politics of silence. You referred to some of the slides having textual evidence, but textual evidence means quotation. You have to bring a quotation from the text to prove whatever you are proving, which is going to be challenging when you use generative AI tools. It will not give you exact quotation. For that, reading original text is necessary. Unless you do not read or are unable to find where these things might be there, it will be difficult to give the textual evidence. Then only your presentation will support your arguments. Otherwise, it remains shallow, still like something is lacking, some punch is lacking, that we feel that you have said everything right, but a punch is lacking. And that punch comes from the citing original. So exactly how in the original text that particular thing is articulated. For stories, you might also have cited Chimamanda Ngozi's, the video that you all have seen, that about stories and how it that was missing in all of your citation. I was trying to see, but I was not able to locate that. So when you talk something about stories or retelling, then this video you have seen, you have written a blog on that. So why it doesn't click in the mind? Why it doesn't click in the mind that, well, why I can't use this there? Krupali also made a good presentation, and it also had a good structure. You made a review of several articles also, and then you gave theoretical framework also to locate your work. Migration, refugee, in context of a foes thing that was done. Krishna also did good. There were 2 articles from Taylor and Francis on cannibalism, eating people. Zoo use reference was also a good one. So how in the contemporary times that write-up about cannibalism, eating humans, why don't we eat humans? So that it starts with that shocking question. So and it is a kind of a hypothetical question, rhetorical question. It doesn't want to say that we should eat humans. That question is not raised, but it is raised in a way that we are consuming humans, but we don't see it in that manner. In our idea of market capitalism or consumerism, we have converted a human into a consumer, and then we keep on consuming humans. So why are we not shocked that we are consuming humans, but we are not shocked? But somebody says, why are we not eating humans? Then we are shocked. So that we performance art is used. That was a good reference to that. KHUSHI Ravia talked about Bollywood films, another thing. So again, this the punch that needs to be coming when you read at this. So if you see Lagan, the other things are there, but a very important point that comes is that what is the role of Elizabeth in the film? Elizabeth is a white woman. How white women is betraying the white people, white men. So how we read that? Or are we expecting that, like we had Jai Chands, there should be Jai Chand on the other side also? Is she that betrayal? And then ultimately gives that white red ball. Red ball is that fire. So Prometheus stealing the fire, white red ball, and giving to human beings. So how we read that? Stealing becomes virtue for us. So that is the stance that, but without Elizabeth, can that be possible? That story can be possible. That victory might be possible. So you rely still a lot on white people for your victories. You still need some white women to help you. So even those points becomes very important. And even Fanon also you are reading. Fanon talks about this black man's psyche also, psychological, and black man's craving for white women. That is also, he talked in Black Skin, White Mask. In another work, Black Skin, White Mask, black men's psyche to crave for a white women. Now that also is getting satisfied in storytelling. We tell a story where a white woman falls in love to the brown men. So for us, Bhuvan may be Gora, but for the white, he is not Gora. He is as black as the black people there. It is like that only for white women from that perspective. Now that gives the punch to reading the things also. If you want to read Article 15, it doesn't have as such directly a colonial influence. But if you want to see that anybody coming from educated class, elite class, urban space are a kind of a colonized people, and they don't know the rural India. The way the white people who came and they were not aware about the societies, African, Indian societies. Is that replicating in that? Then it becomes important. The police officer who comes from a city, he is unaware about something that is India. Then the way he tries to tell and his learning happens, that you need to see there. Even in PK also, you have to still dig deeper to understand the role of language or symbols, that how it can be read as a postcard. It cannot be done simply by picking up the words from here and here. That way it will not give a proper understanding of that. Trupti also tried good to read this climate fictions in context of post-colonial reading. But again, you cited a couple of articles which we gave for reading, but I want to see which line you are using. That was not there. Article is a long article. There are so many things in that. So which exact idea you are picking up in your slide to prove your point. But there was no such citation of a particular line taken from an article, and then you are using that. So then it is missing the punch, that what exactly you want to say. Articles have 10 things. You might be using 1 or 2 only from that. So which 1 or 2 ideas you are using. So that's why you use quote from the article, and then we support with the textual evidence to do that. So these 2 things are important. The idea which I take from the article, I have to write that idea, and then to support that I pick up a textual evidence, so quote from the text. That if starts happening, then also the presentations and the quality will improve also. Bhargav also tried to connect with the market idea and other things there. In the presentations there. In the last part, I was just having a look to of your references that you have given. Last slide, hybridity thesis needs to be understood and explained also very clearly about Appadurai, Baba, all what they say and how that all gets connected with each other. Okay, so with this we end this morning session. Inform the other students to join within 10 minutes.